I trudged through the gleaming hallways of the CDC's main facility in Atlanta, my mop leaving wet streaks across the polished floor. Night shifts were always the quietest. Just me, my cart of cleaning supplies, and the occasional late-working scientist. My name's Derek Lowe, 34 years old, high school education, divorced, and somehow ended up as the guy who cleans the floors where some of the deadliest diseases known to mankind are studied. Ironic how life turns out. 10 years of pushing a mop through these corridors had taught me the rhythm of the place, which labs stayed lit past midnight, which researchers nodded when I passed, which ones never acknowledged my existence. Tonight felt different, though. The air conditioning hummed at its usual pitch, but something felt off. I was mopping near Lab 7B when Dr. Keller burst through the doors, nearly colliding with my cart. His face was pale, glasses askew, lab coat wrinkled, not the composed scientist I'd seen 100 times before. "Everything okay, Doc?" I asked, steadying my mop bucket. He stared at me like he'd never seen me before, though I'd been cleaning his lab for years. "Fine. Everything's fine," he muttered, then hurried away, shoes squeaking against the freshly mopped floor. I shrugged it off. Scientists were weird, especially the ones who worked with the dangerous stuff. I'd learned not to ask questions, just clean and go home, but as I pushed my cart toward the lab doors, I noticed they hadn't fully closed. Protocol said I shouldn't enter when researchers were working, but Keller had left, and my job was to clean. I nudged the door open with my foot. The lab was immaculate as always, counters wiped down, equipment arranged precisely, computer screens glowing with complex data. Nothing seemed out of place until I noticed the storage unit at the far end. The reinforced glass door was slightly ajar, a blinking red light indicating a security breach. Inside, one rack appeared disheveled, with empty slots where cylindrical containers should have been. My stomach tightened. Even with minimal training, I knew those refrigerated units contained samples, dangerous ones. I backed away, deciding this was above my pay grade. I'd report it to security on my way out. Just as I turned to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Marlene, my ex-wife, probably calling about alimony again. I ignored it and continued my rounds. 2 hours later, as I was finishing the East Wing, my phone buzzed again with a news alert. Breaking. Terrorist group claims cyber attack on CDC database. I tapped the notification, scanning the article about a hacking cell called Red Dawn, claiming responsibility for infiltrating CDC systems. They mentioned obtaining classified information, but nothing about physical theft. I wondered if it was related to what I'd seen in Lab 7B. Just as I was about to call security, I heard a crash from the break room down the hall. Mike, another night janitor and probably the closest thing I had to a friend these days, had been taking his midnight break there. I hurried toward the sound, pushing my cart ahead of me. "Mike! You okay in there?" I called out. No response, just another thud, followed by the sound of breaking glass. I pushed open the door to find Mike convulsing on the floor, coffee spilled across his uniform. His eyes were bloodshot, skin ashen, veins protruding like dark rivers beneath his skin. Foam bubbled from his mouth as he thrashed against the linoleum. "Jesus! Mike!" I rushed to his side, reaching for my phone to call for help. That's when Mike stopped convulsing. He went completely still, eyes fixed on the ceiling. I leaned closer, checking for breath. "Mike, buddy, hang on. I'm getting help." His hand shot up, grabbing my wrist with impossible strength. His eyes shifted to mine, but they weren't Mike's eyes anymore. The pupils had expanded, consuming the iris in pools of inky black. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and to my horror, I watched as he gripped his own jaw and tore it downward with a sickening crack. Blood gushed from his self-inflicted wound, splattering across my uniform. I screamed, yanking my arm free and scrambling backward. Mike, or whatever Mike had become, lurched to his feet with jerky, uncoordinated movements. His head tilted at an unnatural angle, jaw hanging loosely from one side, blood cascading down his chest. He lunged at me with a guttural moan that would haunt my nightmares if I lived long enough to have any. I grabbed the first thing I could reach, my mop, and swung it with all my strength. The wooden handle connected with Mike's temple, sending him crashing into the vending machine. Glass shattered, snacks spilled, but Mike was already struggling to his feet again, seemingly unfazed by what should have been a debilitating blow. My heart hammered against my ribs as I backed toward the door. Whatever was happening to Mike wasn't natural. It was something else, something horrifying. As he staggered toward me again, I made a decision. I thrust the mop handle against his chest, pinning him against the wall long enough for me to escape through the door, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, breath coming in ragged gasps, mind racing. Mike's transformation, the missing vials, the terrorist claim, it couldn't be coincidence. I needed to warn someone, but who would believe the night janitor? I needed evidence. My thoughts were interrupted by Mike's body slamming against the other side of the door. The impact reverberated through my spine. He was stronger than before, and the door wouldn't hold him for long. I wedged my mop against the handle for temporary reinforcement and backed away. That's when I heard the screams, distant at first, then multiplying. Alarms began to blare throughout the facility, red emergency lights casting eerie shadows down the corridors. More crashes, more screams, spreading like wildfire through the building. I ran toward the security desk at the main entrance, hoping to find help. Instead, I found carnage. 2 security guards lay on the floor, their throats torn open, blood pooling beneath them. A 3rd guard was pressed against the wall, fighting off a woman in a lab coat whose fingers clawed at his face with inhuman strength. Her neck was twisted at an impossible angle, yet she moved with frenzied purpose. I didn't stop to help. Couldn't. Survival instinct took over as I darted past them toward the exit. The guard's scream cut off abruptly behind me, replaced by wet, tearing sounds I refused to process. The front doors were locked down. Emergency protocol. I swiped my keycard frantically, but the system was unresponsive. I was trapped inside, with whatever horror was spreading through the building. Backtracking, I headed for the loading dock. Another exit, less secure. The halls were chaos now, people running, screaming, some trying to barricade doors, others making futile calls for help. A researcher staggered past me, clutching a bleeding arm, eyes wide with terror. "What's happening?" I grabbed her lab coat. "What is this?" "It's airborne," she whispered, face contorted with fear. "But that's impossible. It wasn't—" She never finished. Her eyes rolled back, body convulsing just like Mike's had. I released her, backing away as dark fluid began leaking from her nose. I ran, through blood-slicked hallways, past colleagues transforming into monsters before my eyes, past the labs where this nightmare had likely been born. My mop became a weapon, a tool for creating distance between myself and the infected. I reached the loading dock to find it overrun. 3 security personnel had formed a defensive line, firing at advancing infected staff members. Bullets tore through flesh but barely slowed the attackers. "Get back!" one guard shouted when he spotted me. "Whole building's compromised." I watched in horror as one infected researcher absorbed multiple shots to the chest before tackling the guard. They fell in a tangle of limbs, the guard's screams joining the cacophony of chaos around us. The remaining guards retreated, sealing a security door and leaving me stranded with the approaching infected. Cornered, I scrambled onto a stack of supply crates, buying precious seconds. The loading bay door was partially open, just enough space for a person to slide under. Beyond it lay the staff parking lot, and beyond that the city of Atlanta, blissfully unaware of the horror unfolding within these walls. I didn't hesitate. I leapt from the crates, rolling under the bay door seconds before grasping hands could seize my ankles. The cool night air hit my face as I stumbled to my feet in the parking lot. Distant sirens wailed, but they weren't coming for us. Not yet. No one outside knew what was happening. My car sat in its usual spot at the far end of the lot. I sprinted toward it, keys already in hand, when my phone buzzed again. This time I answered. "Derek?" Marlene's voice was tinged with irritation. "Did you forget the alimony payment again? I swear to God." "Marlene, listen to me." I cut her off, voice shaking. "Lock your doors. Don't let anyone in. Something's happening, something bad." "What are you talking about?" "Just do it. Stay inside, stay safe. I'll call when I can." I hung up as I reached my car, an old Honda Civic that had seen better days. As I fumbled with the keys, I glanced back at the CDC building. Figures were emerging from various exits now, moving with that same jerky, uncoordinated gait I'd seen in Mike. They were spreading out, some heading toward the main road, others toward the administrative buildings across the campus. I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, hands trembling against the steering wheel. The radio was playing an old rock song, jarringly normal against the nightmare I'd just escaped. I switched to news, desperate for information. Had this spread beyond the CDC? Was the city aware? The regular programming continued uninterrupted. No emergency broadcasts, no warnings. I was perhaps the only person who knew what was coming. As I navigated the empty streets of nighttime Atlanta, my mind raced through options. Police station. They'd think I was crazy. Hospital. Potentially dangerous if the infection had already spread. Home. I lived alone in a small apartment downtown. Not exactly a fortress. Marlene's place was in the suburbs, more defensible, but I couldn't risk leading this thing to her doorstep. I settled on a compromise. A 24-hour diner where I could gather my thoughts, monitor the news, and figure out my next move. The neon sign of Waffle House glowed like a beacon as I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. Inside, a handful of night owls occupied booths. Truckers, hospital staff on break, insomniacs seeking refuge from sleepless nights. None of them knew that death was spreading across Atlanta. I slid into a corner booth with clear sightlines to both exits and ordered coffee from a waitress who looked half asleep herself. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I pulled out my phone and searched for any breaking news about the CDC, finding nothing but the earlier report about the cyber attack. I contemplated calling 911 but hesitated. What would I say? "Hello, zombies are real and they're coming from the CDC?" They'd dismiss me as a crank caller. The television mounted above the counter was showing a late-night talk show. I stared at it, willing it to cut to breaking news, to emergency alerts, to anything that would validate the horror I'd witnessed. Nothing changed except the punchlines. My coffee arrived, and I wrapped my hands around the mug, seeking comfort in its warmth. That's when I noticed the blood, Mike's blood, dried on my uniform sleeves. I hastily covered it with a napkin as the waitress gave me a curious look. "Rough night?" she asked. "You have no idea," I muttered. "You work at the CDC?" She nodded at my badge, still clipped to my shirt. "Janitor," I replied, suddenly wary of drawing attention. "My cousin works security there," she said, refilling a sugar dispenser. "Night shift too." My stomach churned at the thought of the security guards I'd seen torn apart. Was her cousin among them? Would she get a call tonight that would shatter her world, or worse, would her cousin become one of those things and bring the infection here? "I should go," I said, dropping a $5 bill on the table and standing. "Thanks for the coffee." As I pushed through the door into the parking lot, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Is this Derek Lowe?" a man's voice asked. "Who's asking?" "My name is Dr. James Hoffman. I worked with Dr. Keller at the CDC. He told me you were on shift tonight before everything went to hell." His voice was strained, clinical detachment battling with raw fear. "How did you get my number?" "Employee database. Listen carefully, Mr. Lowe. What you witnessed tonight was the beginning. Patient Zero was in Lab 7B, a contamination event that should have been containable, but someone wanted this to spread. The missing vials, I said, remembering the storage unit with its blinking red light. So you saw them? Yes, weapon-grade pathogen samples, modified for maximum communicability. The cyber attack was a distraction for the physical breach. By the time we realized what had happened, it was too late. The first infected were already symptomatic. I leaned against my car, knees suddenly weak. What is it? Some kind of rabies? Something engineered, a chimeric pathogen combining elements of rabies, prion disease, and a fungi-based neural parasite. It rewires the brain, heightens aggression, eliminates pain response, and preserves basic motor function even after clinical death. The infected aren't dead, Mr. Lowe, but they're not human anymore either. How do we stop it? That's why I'm calling. The containment protocols have failed. The infected are already moving into downtown Atlanta. This will be everywhere by morning if we don't act now. I have a secure lab facility outside the city, a private research station where I can work on a treatment, but I need samples, data from patient Zero. It's still at the CDC. I laughed bitterly. And let me guess. You want the janitor to go back into hell and get it for you? You have access. You know the building layout. And according to your file, you served 4 years in the army before your honorable discharge. You have training. I was a supply specialist, not Delta Force, I snapped, and that was 15 years ago. Mr. Lowe, Derek, you might be the only hope we have. The military will quarantine the city once they understand what's happening, but by then it will be too late for containment. We need to develop a treatment before this spreads beyond Georgia. I closed my eyes, remembering the sounds of my colleagues dying, transforming into monsters. What exactly do you need? Dr. Keller's laptop and the original strain samples from the secure refrigeration unit in Lab 7B. The laptop has the genome sequencing data we need to develop a counter-agent. And if I do this, you think you can stop it? Cure people? A cure for the fully transformed is unlikely, Dr. Hoffman admitted, but we might develop a vaccine or a treatment for early-stage infection. It's worth trying, worth risking my life for. I wasn't sure. But what was the alternative? Hide somewhere until the city fell, until the entire country was overrun? Where's your lab? I finally asked. North of the city near Lake Lanier. I can text you the coordinates. And Derek, be careful. The infection seems to progress faster in some subjects than others. If you're exposed, you might have hours or minutes. There's no way to predict. After ending the call, I sat in my car, contemplating my options. The CDC was ground zero for a nightmare that would soon engulf the city. Only a fool would go back there. But if what Dr. Hoffman said was true, I might be the only one who could help stop this. Not because I was special, just because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, with a keycard and knowledge of the building's layout. The sky was beginning to lighten with pre-dawn glow as I made my decision. I'd need supplies, weapons, my mop wouldn't cut it for round 2. I drove to a 24-hour Walmart on the outskirts of town, grateful for my emergency credit card as I loaded my cart with bottled water, energy bars, first aid supplies, a hunting knife and a sturdy crowbar that felt reassuring in my hand. As I checked out, the cashier raised an eyebrow at my blood-stained uniform but said nothing. Atlanta was a big city. She'd probably seen worse. The television behind the customer service desk was still showing regular programming, no emergency broadcasts yet. But as I loaded my supplies into the trunk, I noticed more sirens in the distance, all heading toward downtown. It was starting. I drove back toward the CDC, taking side streets to avoid increasing police presence. Helicopter rotors thumped overhead. news choppers getting their morning traffic reports, unaware they were about to document the fall of Atlanta. I parked 3 blocks away, behind an abandoned construction site that offered cover for my approach. Gearing up felt surreal, like preparing for a mission I'd never trained for. I stripped off my bloodied uniform shirt, replacing it with a dark t-shirt from my gym bag. The crowbar went through my belt loop, the knife in my pocket. I filled a backpack with water, energy bars, and first aid supplies. My keycard, potentially the most valuable item I possessed, went into my front pocket. The CDC complex looked deceptively normal from a distance, a cluster of modern buildings bathed in morning light. But as I approached, using the construction site's shadow for cover, the signs of chaos became apparent. Abandoned vehicles cluttered the parking lots. Some had doors left open, others showed impact damage from collisions. No movement was visible at the main entrances, which could be good or very, very bad. I circled around to the service entrance I'd used countless times, relieved to find it unguarded but concerned about what that implied. The keycard reader blinked red. Power was still on, but the security system was in lockdown mode. My card wouldn't work. Plan B. I moved to a ground-floor window of the administrative wing, a section with lower security that connected to the main research building via an enclosed walkway. The window was already shattered, blood smeared across jagged glass still clinging to the frame. I cleared the remaining shards with my crowbar and climbed through, landing quietly in what had been a human resources office. The interior was devastated. Furniture overturned, papers scattered, blood splattered across walls and floor in dramatic arcs and pools. No bodies, which was somehow more unsettling than finding corpses would have been. I moved cautiously through the administrative wing, crowbar raised, straining to hear anything over the pounding of my own heart. The connecting walkway to the main building featured floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of downtown Atlanta. In the distance, multiple columns of smoke rose into the morning sky. Emergency vehicle lights flashed on major thoroughfares. The infection had indeed escaped the CDC. The city was feeling its first effects. I pressed on, entering the main research building through doors that had been forced open. The emergency lights cast everything in an eerie red glow, shadows stretching into threatening shapes at every turn. I knew the quickest route to Lab 7B, down one floor, through the main atrium, then east, along the primary research corridor. But quickest didn't mean safest. The stairwell was dark, emergency lighting having failed or been destroyed. I used my phone's flashlight, wincing at how it made me a visible target. Each step downward increased the metallic smell of blood and the underlying stench of something worse. Decay accelerated by whatever this pathogen did to human biology. I froze at a sound from below, a wet, dragging noise accompanied by labored breathing. I switched off my light, plunging the stairwell into darkness as I pressed myself against the wall. The sounds grew closer, accompanied by an irregular thumping, something pulling itself up the stairs. I held my breath as a figure emerged from the darkness below, barely visible in the faint light filtering through the door window. It had been a woman once, lab coat now shredded and soaked with blood, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle, causing the dragging gait I'd heard. Her head swiveled blindly, seeking prey through senses I didn't understand. Could they smell? Hear heartbeats? I didn't know the rules of this new reality. I only knew that moving meant death. I remained still as the infected researcher dragged herself past my position, apparently heading for the upper floors. Only when the sounds faded did I allow myself to breathe again. I continued downward, emerging onto the main floor, where the center atrium would normally be filled with staff moving between departments. Now it was a charnel house. Bodies lay strewn across the polished floor, some clearly dead from catastrophic injuries, others missing entirely. Blood trailed in all directions, as though the injured had scattered like wounded animals. I kept to the periphery, using support columns for cover as I moved east toward Lab 7B. Twice I had to backtrack to avoid infected staff members wandering aimlessly through the atrium. Their movements were more coordinated than Mike's had been, as though the pathogen was learning to better control its hosts. The research corridor was marginally better than the atrium, narrower, with fewer bodies and more places to hide. Laboratory doors stood open, equipment scattered where people had grabbed potential weapons in their desperation. I passed Lab 7A, noting the biohazard warnings plastered across its sealed doors. Whatever had been studied there had apparently remained contained, small mercies. Lab 7B's doors were ajar, just as I'd left them the night before, when all of this was still preventable. I slipped inside, immediately spotting the refrigeration unit with its blinking red light. Dr. Keller's workstation sat in the corner, laptop still connected to various analytical equipment. I moved to the computer first, relieved to find it unlocked. Dr. Keller had fled without proper shutdown protocols. The screen showed a genome sequence analysis in progress, the last work he'd been doing before everything went to hell. I disconnected the laptop, wrapping its power cord around it before stashing it in my backpack. The refrigeration unit was more problematic. The security breach warning still flashed, but the electronic lock had reset, requiring a passcode I didn't have. I examined the housing, looking for vulnerabilities, when I noticed something on the floor nearby, Dr. Keller's access badge. It must have fallen during his hasty exit. I swiped it across the reader, and the lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside, most sample slots were empty, confirming my fears about the scale of the theft. But at the back of the unit, in a secondary containment box marked Original Strain, Phase 1, I found what I hoped was Dr. Hoffman's critical sample. I carefully placed it in an insulated pocket of my backpack, trying not to think about what would happen if it broke. Task accomplished, I turned to leave, and froze. Standing in the doorway was a figure I recognized with a jolt of horror, Dr. Keller himself. His formerly immaculate appearance was gone, replaced by a blood-soaked nightmare. His white coat hung in tatters, revealing a torso slashed with self-inflicted wounds where he'd apparently clawed at his own skin. His eyes, like Mike's had been, were black pools of nothingness. He tilted his head, studying me with the predatory focus of a reptile. I raised my crowbar defensively, backing toward the far wall where another door led to an adjoining lab. Dr. Keller, or the thing wearing his body, let out a sound like steam escaping a pressure valve and charged. I swung the crowbar, connecting with his shoulder. The impact should have shattered bone, but he barely registered the blow. His hands closed around my throat with crushing strength, driven by muscles no longer constrained by the brain's protective limitations. I brought the crowbar down again, this time on his forearm, feeling something crack beneath the blow. His grip loosened fractionally, enough for me to tear free and kick him backward. I scrambled for the side door, yanking it open and throwing myself through. I slammed it shut behind me, jamming my keycard between the door and frame to buy precious seconds. Keller's body slammed against the other side, the metal door buckling slightly under impacts no human should have been capable of producing. The adjoining lab offered no exit except back into the main corridor. I moved quickly, navigating around workstations and equipment, reaching the hallway door just as I heard the connecting door give way. I didn't look back, just ran into the corridor and directly into the path of 3 more infected staff members shuffling toward the commotion. I pivoted, heading deeper into the research wing rather than back toward the atrium. The infected followed, not running but moving with relentless purpose. I turned corners randomly, trying to lose them in the labyrinthine layout of the research level. My lungs burned, legs protesting as I pushed myself to maintain distance from my pursuers. I found myself in the virology section, a part of the building I rarely cleaned due to its heightened security protocols. Most doors were sealed, but one stood open, a decontamination chamber leading to a secure research area. I ducked inside, pulling the heavy door closed behind me. The chamber was designed to cycle air and spray disinfectant between the outer and inner secure areas. I hit the cycle start button, praying the emergency power hadn't affected this system. Red lights flashed as air hissed through vents. Disinfectant mist filled the chamber, soaking my clothes and skin with a chemical tang that burned my eyes and throat. Through the small window in the outer door, I could see the infected gathering, beating mindlessly against the reinforced glass. It would hold, for now. The cycle completed, and the inner door unlocked with a pneumatic hiss. I pushed through into the secure lab beyond, finding it mercifully empty. This area housed Level 4 containment facilities where the most dangerous pathogens were studied. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now hiding among lesser threats to escape the greater one loose in the building. A wall-mounted facility map showed I'd reached the eastern edge of the complex. The nearest exit was a loading dock similar to the one I'd escaped through the previous night. If I could reach it, I might make it back to my car and then to Dr. Hoffman's lab. I allowed myself a moment to catch my breath and check my backpack. The laptop and sample were intact, though the pack was now damp with disinfectant, a small price to pay for temporary safety. I took a long drink of water and forced myself to eat an energy bar, knowing I'd need the strength for what came next. The secure area had another exit, an emergency stairwell requiring keycard access to enter from the lab side, but unrestricted from the stairwell side. I swiped Doctor. Keller's badge. Thankful when the light turned green and the door unlocked. The stairwell was concrete and steel, industrial and functional, unlike the more polished main areas of the facility. It smelled of dust and disuse, a good sign that the infected hadn't discovered this route. I climbed up one level, emerging onto a service corridor that should lead toward the east loading dock. Emergency lights cast long shadows as I moved cautiously forward, crowbar ready. The air felt different here, stagnant, the ventilation systems having failed or been shut down as part of containment protocols. The corridor ended at a set of double doors marked East Receiving. I pressed my ear against the metal, listening for movement beyond. Nothing. I eased the door open just enough to peek through. The loading dock was smaller than the main one I'd escaped through before, just 2 bays instead of 6. One bay door was fully open, early morning sunlight streaming into the cavernous space. Freedom was 30 yards away, but between me and that exit were at least a dozen infected staff members, standing motionless like grotesque statues. They weren't feeding, fighting, or moving, just standing, heads tilted slightly as though listening for something. I'd have to cross the open space to reach the exit, and there was no way to do it without being seen. I retreated into the corridor to think. Could I create a distraction? The fire alarm would be too obvious, and I didn't know if loud noises attracted or repelled these things. I needed something more targeted. At the end of the corridor was a small maintenance room. Inside, I found cleaning supplies, tools, and, blessedly, a set of two-way radios used by the maintenance staff. I grabbed one, checking that it still had battery power. Green light. I set it to maximum volume, then scrolled through channels until I heard static. Back at the loading dock doors, I took a deep breath and enacted my desperate plan. I switched the radio to transmit mode, placed it on the ground just inside the doors, and kicked it hard, sending it skittering across the concrete floor of the loading dock. The clattering noise immediately drew the attention of every infected in the space. As they converged on the radio, I slipped through the doors and hugged the wall, moving as quietly as possible toward the open bay. The plan worked better than I'd dared hope. The infected surrounded the radio, some crouching to examine it, others swatting at it with uncoordinated movements. Their focus gave me the opening I needed to slide along the periphery of the room and make a dash for the exit. I was 10 feet from freedom when the radio's battery died, silencing the static that had captivated my pursuers. As one, They turned toward the sound of my footsteps on concrete. I abandoned stealth and ran, their inhuman shrieks following me as I burst into the morning light and sprinted across the loading area toward a chain-link fence separating the CDC property from an adjacent business park. The fence was 8 feet tall with barbed wire at the top, normally a serious deterrent, but now just another obstacle to survival. I jumped, catching the chain link and pulling myself up with adrenaline-fueled strength. The barbed wire caught my pants leg as I swung over the top, tearing fabric and skin. I barely felt the pain as I dropped to the other side, rolling to absorb the impact. Behind me, the infected reached the fence. They grabbed the chain link with bloody hands, shaking it with frustrated rage, unable to replicate my climbing maneuver with their damaged cognition. Their howls followed me as I limped across the business park toward the street where I'd left my car. To my horror, the streets were no longer empty. What had been a ghost town during my approach was now showing signs of the infection's spread. A city bus had crashed into a storefront a block away, smoke rising from its crumpled hood. Abandoned vehicles littered the road, some with doors hanging open, others with bloodied windows. Distant screams and sporadic gunfire suggested pockets of resistance forming as Atlanta awakened to nightmare. I kept to alleyways and side streets, avoiding main roads where infected citizens now wandered. My car, miraculously, remained untouched where I'd left it. I slid behind the wheel, hands shaking so badly I could barely insert the key. The engine started on the first try, a small mercy in a day sorely lacking them. Dr. Hoffman had texted coordinates for his facility, a private research station north of the city. I plugged them into my phone's GPS and pulled onto the street, immediately having to swerve around an abandoned police cruiser. Its light bar still flashed, driver's side door open, interior spattered with something dark and wet. The route would take me through downtown Atlanta, which seemed suicidal given what I'd seen. But all alternate routes added hours I didn't have. I steeled myself for the journey, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled determination. Downtown was chaos incarnate. The infection had spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Emergency vehicles formed ineffective blockades on major streets. Military Humvees had begun to appear, soldiers establishing defensive positions at key intersections. Civilians ran in all directions, some fleeing infected pursuers, others simply running from the collapsing social order. I navigated through back streets when possible, forced onto main thoroughfares when debris or abandoned vehicles blocked my path. Twice I had to accelerate through groups of infected, the thud of bodies against my car making me flinch despite everything I'd already witnessed. A military checkpoint loomed ahead on Peachtree Street, soldiers in hazmat suits checking vehicles attempting to leave the city center. They were overwhelmed, the line of cars stretching for blocks. Beyond them, I could see the interstate, my route north to Dr. Hoffman's lab. I didn't have time to wait. Every minute increased the risk that the laptop battery would die or the sample would degrade. I swung my car onto a service road running parallel to the main street, hoping it might bypass the checkpoint. It narrowed alarmingly, barely wide enough for my compact car, then ended abruptly at a construction barrier. Dead end. As I reversed to find another route, movement caught my eye. An alley connecting to another street that appeared less congested. I took it, emerging onto a residential road that paralleled the interstate for several blocks before an on-ramp appeared. No checkpoint, but the reason became immediately apparent. The on-ramp was partially blocked by a multi-car pileup, flames licking from one overturned vehicle. There was just enough space for a small car to squeeze past if the driver didn't mind the risk of fire or debris. I gunned the engine, scraping past the wreckage with inches to spare, paint peeling from my door in the heat of the burning car. Then I was on the interstate, heading north away from downtown Atlanta. The northbound lanes were congested but moving, filled with people fleeing the city. Southbound was eerily empty, save for military vehicles and emergency responders heading toward the catastrophe. I weaved through traffic, pushing my old Honda harder than it was designed for, watching the gas gauge drop at an alarming rate. The car wasn't built for this kind of desperate flight. 30 minutes later, I'd cleared the worst of the exodus. The suburbs thinned, giving way to the forested hills north of Atlanta. My GPS indicated I was nearing Lake Lanier, a massive reservoir created in the 1950s by flooding a valley and the small towns within it. Dr. Hoffman's coordinates led to the far side of the lake, away from the popular recreation areas. The final approach was a narrow gravel road winding through dense forest. No signs marked the private research facility, just a gate with a keypad that swung open as I approached. Someone was watching, expecting me. The facility itself was surprisingly modest, a single-story building of concrete and glass that resembled an upscale medical clinic more than a secret lab. I parked beside the only other vehicle, a late-model SUV with government plates, and grabbed my backpack. Before I could reach the entrance, the door swung open to reveal a man in his 50s wearing a rumpled dress shirt and khakis under a lab coat. His silver-streaked hair was disheveled, face haggard with exhaustion. "Dr. Hoffman?" I asked, though I already knew. "Mr. Lowe." He nodded, gesturing me inside. "Did you get it?" I patted my backpack. "Laptop and original samples, as requested." Relief flooded his features. "Thank God. Come in, quickly." The interior was sparse but state-of-the-art, a reception area that led to a lab space visible through glass walls. Equipment hummed, centrifuges spun, and computer monitors displayed data streams I couldn't begin to comprehend. For a private facility, it was impressively equipped. "How bad is it in the city?" Hoffman asked as he led me deeper into the building. "Worse than you can imagine," I replied. "Downtown is falling. Military's trying to establish perimeters, but there are too many infected. They move fast, and they're strong. Bullets don't stop them easily." "The pathogen causes massive adrenaline production," Hoffman explained. "It overrides pain receptors and disables the brain's limiters on muscle strength. An infected person can literally tear their own muscles and break their own bones from exertion without feeling it." "That explains a lot." I handed him the backpack. "Your colleague, Dr. Keller, was among the infected. I had to avoid him." Hoffman's face darkened. "Michael Keller was a friend for 20 years, one of the brightest virologists I've ever known. He was working on countermeasures for weaponized pathogens. The irony isn't lost on me." He led me to a small break room with a sofa that looked like it had served as a recent bed. "Rest here. There's food in the refrigerator. Shower through that door. I need to get to work immediately." "How long will it take?" I asked. "To develop a treatment? If we're lucky, days. If not." He shrugged. "The military will establish quarantine zones. They'll try containment first, then more permanent solutions if that fails." "Meaning what?" "Meaning Atlanta might not exist this time next week if we don't find an answer." He took the backpack and headed for the lab, leaving me alone with that chilling thought. I showered mechanically, watching pink-tinged water swirl down the drain. Blood I hadn't even realized was on me. The hot water revealed dozens of cuts, scrapes, and bruises I'd accumulated during my escape. None seemed serious, just painful reminders of how close I'd come to not making it out. Clean clothes had been left for me, simple surgical scrubs that were slightly too large but blessedly free of blood and disinfectant. I ate cold sandwich fixings from the refrigerator without tasting them, then collapsed onto the sofa, intending just to rest my eyes. I awoke to Hoffman shaking my shoulder, his expression grim. The clock on the wall showed I'd been asleep for nearly 6 hours. "You need to see this," he said, leading me to the main lab where a television was showing news coverage. The screen displayed aerial footage of downtown Atlanta engulfed in flames. Military helicopters circled, occasionally firing into the streets below. The caption read, "Atlanta quarantine, martial law declared." A news anchor spoke over the footage, confirmed that the CDC was ground zero for the outbreak of what authorities are calling a highly aggressive pathogen. The governor has ordered a full evacuation of uninfected civilians from the greater Atlanta area, while military forces establish a quarantine perimeter. President Wilson has authorized the deployment of National Guard units from neighboring states to support containment efforts. "It's moving faster than I anticipated," Hoffman said, muting the television. "The infection rate is exponential. At this progression, Atlanta will be completely overrun within 24 hours. "What about your treatment? Any progress?" "Some. Keller's data is proving invaluable. The pathogen is artificially engineered, combining elements that shouldn't be compatible. It's elegant, in a horrific way." He ran a hand through his hair. "I've isolated the mechanism of infection and begun synthesizing potential blockers, but we're still days away from anything viable." "We don't have days," I pointed out, gesturing to the television where smoke rose from my city. "No," he sighed heavily. "We don't. Which is why I need your help again." "What now? Another suicide mission?" "Not suicide, salvation. The CDC has a secure vaccine development lab in Sublevel 3. It contains equipment I don't have here, specifically a quantum molecular assembler that could reduce our development time from days to hours. With it, I could synthesize enough treatment to begin human trials by tomorrow." "And let me guess, you want me to go back into hell and get it for you?" I laughed bitterly. "The place is overrun. The military is shooting anything that moves. Not the whole machine, just its core processing unit and synthesis module. They're designed to be portable for emergency deployment, and you wouldn't go alone. I have resources." As if on cue, the facility's door opened and 3 men entered. They wore tactical gear over civilian clothes, carrying military-grade weapons with practiced ease. Their leader, a weathered man in his 40s with a close-cropped beard, nodded to Hoffman. "Mr. Lowe, this is Commander Davis, former Special Forces, now private contractor for certain government interests." "Which government interests?" I asked. "The kind that plan for scenarios exactly like this one," Davis replied, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Dr. Hoffman contacted my team when the first reports came in. We were already en route when you made your supply run this morning. And now you want to go into Zombie Central to steal lab equipment?" I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. "We're going to secure mission-critical technology to prevent the fall of the Eastern Seaboard," Davis corrected. "And yes, we need you, because you know the building layout and have access credentials the military won't." "The quarantine is already established," Hoffman added. "Soon they'll move to more final containment measures. Our window of opportunity is closing." "Final containment?" I echoed. "You mean they'll bomb the city?" "Strategic strikes on critical outbreak centers," Davis said matter-of-factly. "CDC would be primary target 0. Midnight tomorrow is the current timeline, assuming containment continues to fail." I thought of Marlene, of my neighbors, of the millions of people in Atlanta, infected and uninfected alike. Bombing the city would kill everyone, stop the spread, and bury the government's involvement in creating this nightmare all at once. Convenient. "And if we get this equipment," I asked, "if Dr. Hoffman develops a treatment?" "Then we have options besides burning Atlanta to the ground," Davis said. "But that window is closing fast." I closed my eyes, weighing impossible choices. I was a janitor, not a hero. I cleaned floors, emptied trash, went home to an empty apartment. Nothing in my life had prepared me for this responsibility. But then, who was ever prepared for the end of the world? "When do we leave?" I finally asked. "Now," Davis replied. Gear up. The gearing up process was surreal, like a scene from an action movie I had no business being in. Davis's team outfitted me with a tactical vest, communications headset, and a sidearm I barely knew how to use. One team member, who introduced himself only as Reese, gave me a crash course in basic tactics while the others prepared our transportation, a black SUV with reinforced bumpers and windows. Stay behind us, do exactly what we say, and if something goes sideways, run like hell, Reese instructed. Don't try to be a hero. Not a problem, I assured him. Dr. Hoffman approached as we finished preparations. He looked even more haggard than before, the weight of humanity's survival visibly crushing him. The equipment is in Sub-Level 3, Lab 12. It's about the size of a small refrigerator, 2 main components that connect via standard interfaces. This drive contains authorization codes to release the security locks. He handed me a USB stick. And Derek, and thank you, not many would go back into that hell willingly. Not doing it for thanks, I replied, pocketing the drive. Just trying to undo some of the damage your colleagues created. His face fell, but he nodded. Fair enough. The journey back toward Atlanta was a descent into apocalypse. The further south we drove, the more evidence we saw of society's collapse. Abandoned vehicles lined the northbound lanes, people who had run out of gas in their desperation to flee. Military checkpoints had been established at major exits, turning away those trying to enter the quarantine zone. Davis had credentials that got us through, government clearances that raised eyebrows but opened gates. The soldiers we encountered looked shell-shocked, many bearing wounds or blood spatter that told of close encounters with the infected. None questioned our mission. They were too busy fighting a losing battle. As we approached downtown, the devastation became overwhelming. Buildings burned unchecked, smoke obscuring the afternoon sun. Bodies lay in the streets, some obviously infected, others simply unlucky civilians caught in the chaos. Military vehicles formed barricades at strategic intersections, soldiers firing at anything that moved with infected-like behavior. Jesus, I whispered as we passed a school bus overturned in a park, its windows shattered, dark stains visible even from a distance. Focus, Davis commanded from the driver's seat. We've got a job to do. The CDC complex was barely recognizable. Parts of the main building had collapsed from interior explosions or fires. Military personnel had established a perimeter around it, machine gun nests covering all approaches. A command center had been set up in what had been the visitor parking lot, officers huddled around tactical displays. Davis parked behind a barricade and approached the commanding officer, flashing credentials that prompted immediate, if reluctant, cooperation. I couldn't hear their conversation, but it involved much gesturing toward the building and checking of watches. When Davis returned, his expression was grim. Timelines accelerated. Airstrike's been moved up to 0300 hours. We've got less than 5 hours to get in and out. Why the change? Reese asked. Infections spreading faster than they can contain. Military's losing men faster than they can be replaced. They're pulling back to a wider perimeter and writing off the city center. Davis checked his weapon. We've got a small window. They're going to give us covering fire to reach the east entrance. Then we're on our own. Buildings still crawling with infected, and they've observed some concerning developments. What kind of developments? I asked, not sure I wanted the answer. The infected are showing signs of coordination, Davis said flatly, moving in groups, setting ambushes. Early infected were mindless rage machines. These are evolving. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the infected in the loading bay, how they had stood still, listening, before converging on the radio I'd thrown, not mindless at all. Our approach to the east entrance was a tactical nightmare. We moved in a tight diamond formation, Davis on point, me in the center, the other team members covering our flanks and rear. Soldiers provided covering fire, concentrating on visible infected trying to breach the military perimeter. The noise was overwhelming: gunfire, screams, the wail of distant sirens, and the constant backdrop of helicopter rotors. We reached the entrance without direct confrontation, though infected could be seen moving inside the shattered glass doors. Davis used a shotgun to clear the remaining glass, and we entered the building that had once been my workplace. Now a vision of hell. Emergency lighting still functioned in some areas, casting red glows that transformed blood spatters into black oil across walls and floors. The air was thick with the copper scent of blood and the underlying sweet-rot smell of infected flesh. We moved carefully, using hand signals rather than voices when possible. I oriented myself, pointing toward the stairwell that would take us down to sub-level 3. The first serious resistance came in the main corridor, a group of infected scientists who charged us with unnerving coordination. Davis and his team fired with precision, dropping them with headshots that seemed to be the only reliable way to stop them. The noise attracted more, forcing us to move faster than planned toward the stairwell. "They're responding to the sound," Reese whispered as we regrouped at the stairwell door. "Adapting tactics." "Stay frosty," Davis ordered. "Low, you're sure this is the right way?" I nodded. Sub-level 3 is 4 flights down. The secure labs are in the northeast quadrant. The stairwell was dark, our tactical lights cutting swaths through the gloom. We descended cautiously, every footstep echoing despite our efforts at stealth. Halfway down, Davis held up a closed fist, the signal to halt. Below us, something moved in the darkness. Many somethings, judging by the sounds of shuffling feet and labored breathing. Davis pulled a small object from his vest, a flashbang grenade. He raised 3 fingers, then 2, then 1, before tossing it down the stairwell and covering his ears. The explosion of light and sound was disorienting even with warning. Before the echoes died, Davis was moving again, firing into the stunned infected below. We followed, stepping over twitching bodies as we continued our descent. Sub-level 3 was in better condition than the upper floors, the security protocols having kept many infected out, or perhaps trapped them in. The reinforced doors to the secure lab area remained intact, requiring both keycard access and a numeric code. I used Dr. Keller's badge and the code Hoffman had provided, relieved when the light turned green and the locks disengaged. Beyond the doors lay a high-tech research area I'd never seen during my years at the facility. Multiple labs branched off from a central corridor, each dedicated to different aspects of vaccine development. Lab 12 was at the far end, the Rapid Response Synthesis Lab, according to the signage. "Watch our 6, Davis instructed one of his men, who took up position facing back the way we'd come. "Reese, secure the room. Low, find the equipment." Lab 12 was immaculate compared to the chaos above, apparently untouched by the infected. The quantum molecular assembler dominated the center of the room, a massive apparatus of gleaming metal and glass. I located the core processing unit and synthesis module just as Hoffman had described. They were housed in reinforced cases designed for field deployment. "That's it," I confirmed, pointing to the components. "We need both units." Davis and Reese detached the modules while I stood watch, nervous about how smoothly things were going. Nothing in the past 24 hours had been easy. Why start now? My answer came as we were securing the second component. A crash echoed from the corridor, followed by gunfire from the team member watching our exit. Davis cursed, sealing the case and slinging it over his shoulder. "Move! Backup exit?" I frantically searched my memory for the sub-level layout. "Maintenance tunnel. Through the storage room, leads to the emergency evacuation shaft." We grabbed the equipment and rushed toward the storage room at the back of the lab. Behind us, the gunfire intensified, then cut off abruptly. The infected had overwhelmed our lookout. The storage room was cluttered with equipment and supplies, making our progress slow and awkward while carrying the heavy components. I located the maintenance access panel and wrenched it open, revealing a narrow utility tunnel designed for pipe and cable access. "It's tight, but it should lead to the evacuation shaft," I explained. "That goes straight to the surface, emergency exit protocol." Davis went first, awkwardly maneuvering the processing unit through the confined space. Reese followed with the synthesis module. I entered last, pulling the access panel closed behind me, just as infected burst into the storage room. Their howls of frustration followed us as we crawled through the claustrophobic tunnel, lit only by our tactical lights. The tunnel seemed endless, every joint and turn a struggle with our bulky cargo. My knees and elbows were raw from scraping against metal and concrete. Finally, we reached a vertical shaft with a ladder leading upward, the emergency evacuation route I'd promised. "Up," Davis ordered. "Secure the equipment to your back. Use both hands on the ladder." We rigged makeshift harnesses from equipment straps, distributing the weight of the components as best we could. Then we began the climb, 50 feet of vertical shaft that felt like scaling a skyscraper with the awkward burden. Above, a circular hatch marked the exit to the surface. Davis reached it first, straining to turn the manual release wheel. It moved grudgingly, decades of minimal use making the mechanism stiff. With a final heave, the wheel spun freely and the hatch swung upward, revealing star-filled night sky beyond. We emerged onto the grounds of the CDC complex in what had once been a landscaped garden area now trampled by military vehicles. The command center lights were visible several hundred yards away, our extraction point. Between us and safety lay open ground potentially filled with infected. "Move fast, stay low," Davis instructed. "If we get separated, the rendezvous is the command post. Priority is the equipment." We began moving across the open ground, keeping to shadows where possible. The weight of the equipment slowed our pace, making stealth difficult. Halfway to the command post, movement to our left caused Davis to signal a halt. A group of infected, at least 20, moved with disturbing coordination across our path, heading toward the military perimeter. "They're organizing," Reese whispered, "like a pack." "Wait until they're past, then we move," Davis replied. We crouched in the shadow of a maintenance shed, watching the group of infected. Their movement patterns had changed from the mindless wandering I'd seen earlier. They kept formation, with larger infected on the perimeter and smaller ones in the center. Most disturbing was their silence, no moans or growls, just deliberate, quiet movement. Once they passed, we continued toward the command post. We were within 100 yards when everything went wrong. A flare shot into the sky from the military position, bathing the area in harsh white light. It wasn't meant for us, likely a standard perimeter security measure, but it exposed our position to any watching eyes. The response was immediate. Howls erupted from multiple directions as infected who had been hidden in buildings and vehicles emerged, converging on our position. There were dozens, moving with frightening speed and purpose. "Run!" Davis shouted, abandoning stealth. "Head for the perimeter!" We sprinted toward the military position, weighted down by our precious cargo. I could hear the infected gaining ground behind us, their footsteps a thundering counterpoint to my hammering heart. Ahead, soldiers spotted our approach, raising weapons uncertainly. "Friendlies coming in," Davis bellowed. "Cover fire!" Machine gun fire erupted over our heads, cutting down the closest pursuers. But there were too many, closing from all sides now. Reese stumbled, recovering quickly but losing precious steps to our hunters. An infected, once a security guard judging by the tattered uniform, lunged from behind a burned-out car, tackling him to the ground. "Keep moving!" Davis ordered as I instinctively slowed to help. "The equipment is priority." I ran, hating myself for abandoning Reese, but knowing Davis was right. Behind me, gunshots indicated Reese was fighting back, but his screams confirmed it wasn't enough. I pushed harder, lungs burning, legs threatening to buckle. The military perimeter was 30 yards away, soldiers firing continuously to clear our path. 20 yards. 10. I could see individual faces now, shouting encouragement, urging us forward. Something slammed into my back with the force of a linebacker, driving me to the ground. My face hit dirt, teeth cutting into my lip. I rolled, coming face to face with an infected woman, her features barely recognizable beneath blood and self-inflicted wounds. Her hands closed around my throat, inhumanly strong. I struggled, vision beginning to darken at the edges. A shot rang out, and the infected's grip slackened. Her weight was pulled off me as Davis hauled me to my feet. "Move!" We staggered the final yards to the perimeter, soldiers grabbing us and pulling us behind the barricade. I collapsed against a Humvee, gasping for breath, the synthesis module still miraculously attached to my makeshift harness. Davis was already conferring with the commanding officer, gesturing urgently toward the equipment we'd recovered. A medic approached me, examining the wounds on my neck where the infected's fingers had broken skin. "Any contact with infected blood or saliva?" he asked clinically. "I don't think so," I managed between ragged breaths. Is that how it spreads?" "Bodily fluids, primarily. Possibly airborne in concentrated areas." He cleaned the wounds with antiseptic that stung like fire. "We've seen incubation periods between 30 minutes and 6 hours, depending on exposure method and individual physiology." "Meaning if I'm infected, we'll know soon," I translated grimly. "We'll monitor you." He applied bandages to my neck. "But for now, you're being evacuated." "Commander's orders." Davis returned, his expression unreadable. "Choppers inbound. We're taking the equipment directly to Hoffman's lab. ETA 5 minutes. "What about the airstrike?" I asked. "Still on schedule. We've got hours, not days." He checked his watch. "Let's hope Hoffman works fast." The helicopter ride was a blur of exhaustion and pain as my body processed the punishment it had endured. Below us, Atlanta burned, fires visible in every district, smoke obscuring vast sections of the once vibrant city. Military aircraft circled, occasionally firing missiles at targets I couldn't identify. The quarantine had become a war zone. We reached Hoffman's facility shortly after midnight. The doctor met us at the helipad, his eyes widening at our battered condition, but focusing quickly on the equipment we'd risked everything to recover. "It's intact?" he asked, examining the cases. "Perfectly," Davis confirmed. "Now work your miracle, Doctor." Clocks ticking. Hoffman and his assistants, scientists I hadn't seen during my previous visit, immediately began setting up the equipment. I was ushered to the facility's small medical bay, where my wounds were properly cleaned and dressed. The doctor there drew blood samples and attached monitoring equipment to track my vital signs. "Precautionary," she explained. "We've been studying the infection progression. Early detection might give us treatment options if I'm infected," I finished. "I get it." "Try to rest," she advised, administering a mild painkiller. "We'll monitor you closely." Rest seemed impossible with the fate of Atlanta, and possibly the world, hanging in the balance. But my body had other ideas. The moment my head touched the pillow, exhaustion claimed me, dragging me into fitful sleep, punctuated by nightmares of gnashing teeth and dead eyes. I awoke to Davis shaking my shoulder. The clock showed 2 a.m., 1 hour until the scheduled airstrike. "Hoffman wants to see you," Davis said without preamble. In the main lab, Hoffman stood amid a whirlwind of activity. The quantum molecular assembler hummed with purpose, synthesizing compounds according to his specifications. Multiple screens displayed molecular structures, simulation results, and production metrics. "Derek," Hoffman greeted me, fatigue evident in every line of his face. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but otherwise fine." "Any progress?" "Yes and no." He gestured to the screens. "We've developed a treatment protocol that shows promise in simulations." It can't cure fully transformed infected, but it appears to halt progression in early-stage cases and potentially provide immunity for the uninfected. That's good news, right? The synthesis process is slower than anticipated. We can produce perhaps 100 doses before the airstrike, nowhere near enough to make a difference at the population level. So we've failed, I said flatly. Not necessarily. Hoffman's expression became calculating. The military plans to bomb the CDC and other primary infection centers, eliminate the source and the most concentrated infected populations. But that won't stop the spread outside the quarantine zone. We've already received reports of cases in Macon, Augusta, even as far as Savannah. What are you suggesting? A targeted deployment of our limited supply. Protect key personnel who can manufacture more once we're evacuated to a secure facility. Scientists, medical staff, military command, and civilians? The millions of people in Atlanta? Hoffman's gaze slid away from mine. Triage is necessary in emergency situations. We can't save everyone. The cold calculation in his voice triggered a realization that had been building since I first encountered him. You knew, didn't you? About the weapon development, about what was really happening at the CDC. That's hardly relevant now. It's entirely relevant. I stepped closer, anger overriding caution. This wasn't an accident. The terrorists who stole those samples, they were what, government agents? A controlled release to test effectiveness? And it got out of hand. Davis moved between us, hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. Stand down, Lowe. We have more immediate concerns. Like covering up what really happened, I challenged. Bombing Atlanta to destroy the evidence? Like preventing this from spreading across the entire eastern seaboard, Davis countered. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. Tell that to the millions of people about to die, I shouted, restraint finally snapping. This is murder, not sacrifice. Enough, Hoffman intervened. What's done is done. We need to focus on containment now. I stared at them both, these men planning to decide who lived and who died with their precious 100 doses. In that moment, I made a decision that would likely cost me my life, but might save countless others. You're right, I said, forcing my voice to calm. I need some air to process this. Davis looked suspicious but nodded toward the door. 5 minutes, then we need to prepare for evacuation. I walked out, mind racing. The synthesizer was producing the treatment even now, vials of clear liquid being automatically filled and sealed. The medical bay where I'd been treated had refrigeration units for biological samples, and most importantly, I'd seen where they kept the vehicle keys. 5 minutes was all I needed. The evacuation helicopter wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes, according to the schedule on Hoffman's desk. The SUV I'd seen earlier was still parked outside, keys hanging on a board in the security office. I moved quickly, grabbing a small medical transport container from the lab storage room, then slipping into the production area while Hoffman and Davis were distracted by evacuation preparations. The synthesizer had completed 43 doses, not 100, but enough to prove the treatment worked if I could get them to the right people. I loaded the vials carefully into the transport container, sealed it, and hid it under my borrowed scrubs top. Making my excuses about gathering my few belongings, I retrieved the keys from the security office and walked casually toward the exit. Once outside, I moved quickly to the SUV, stashed the container securely, and started the engine. The facility was remote enough that the sound wouldn't immediately alert those inside. I was halfway down the access road when the facility's exterior lights flashed on, illuminating my escape. In the rearview mirror, I saw figures running from the building, Davis in the lead, weapon drawn. I floored the accelerator, tires spitting gravel as the SUV lurched forward. A shot cracked behind me, missing the vehicle but leaving no doubt about Davis's intentions. I drove recklessly fast down the winding forest road, putting distance between myself and the facility. Once I reached the main highway, I had a decision to make. Where to take the precious treatment? The military command post at the CDC perimeter was the obvious choice. They had the infrastructure to test the treatment, verify its effectiveness, and potentially delay the airstrike if it proved viable. But would they listen to a janitor with a stolen SUV and wild claims about government conspiracies? My phone rang. Dr. Hoffman's number. I answered on speaker. "You're making a mistake." His voice was tightly controlled. "Those doses were allocated for essential personnel." "Essential to whom?" I shot back. "The people who created this nightmare? I'm taking them to people who'll use them to help everyone, not just your chosen few." "You don't understand the full picture." "I understand enough. You played with fire and it got out of control. Now you're willing to sacrifice millions to cover your tracks." "The airstrike is happening regardless of what you do," Hoffman warned. "You're just wasting doses that could save key scientists, people who might develop a permanent solution." "People like you mean? The ones responsible for this in the first place?" I hung up, tossing the phone out the window for good measure. They'd be tracking it, and I couldn't afford to be found before reaching the command post. The highway was deserted this far north of the city, giving me clear passage for the first 20 miles. As I approached the outer quarantine perimeter, however, military checkpoints appeared, turning away civilian vehicles attempting to flee the city and scrutinizing any trying to enter. I pulled onto the shoulder a quarter-mile from the first checkpoint, assessing my options. My CDC badge might get me through, but the stolen vehicle and suspicious container would raise questions I couldn't afford. I needed another approach. An ambulance sped past, lights flashing but siren silent, likely returning to the disaster zone after dropping patients at a field hospital. I pulled back onto the road, accelerating to catch up to it. If I could follow closely enough, the soldiers might wave me through in the ambulance's wake, assuming I was related emergency services. The gambit worked better than I'd hoped. The checkpoint was dealing with a crowd of desperate civilians attempting to flee, focusing their attention outward rather than on vehicles entering the quarantine zone. The ambulance was waved through with minimal verification, and I followed closely, hunching over the wheel to obscure my face. The guard glanced at the government plates on the SUV and motioned me forward without checking identification. Inside the quarantine zone, the devastation was worse than when we'd left. The military was in full retreat, abandoning the inner perimeter positions to establish a final defensive line before the airstrike. Fires burned unchecked throughout the city, the night sky glowing orange with reflected flames. The streets were largely empty of living civilians. Most had either escaped, been infected, or were hiding in whatever shelter they could find. The command post at the CDC had been relocated since our extraction, a passing military patrol informing me it had moved to Emory University Hospital, a major medical center equipped for mass casualties and still holding against the infection. I redirected there, navigating streets filled with abandoned vehicles and occasional groups of infected who turned toward my headlights with predatory focus. Emory's campus had been transformed into a fortress. Military vehicles formed barricades around the hospital complex, with machine gun nests covering all approaches. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, allowing soldiers to identify and eliminate any infected attempting to approach. I was stopped half a mile from the entrance, soldiers training weapons on the SUV, until I identified myself. "CDC employee," I called out, hands visible through the window. "I have experimental treatment samples from Dr. Hoffman's team, time-sensitive." They approached cautiously, weapons ready. One examined my badge while another searched the vehicle, finding the medical transport container. "Call it in," the senior officer ordered. "Full escort to medical command." I was transferred to a military Humvee, the treatment samples carefully secured. The SUV was confiscated, my actions noted in a report that would likely reach Davis and Hoffman eventually, but not before I delivered the treatment to people who might actually use it to help others. The hospital was a study in organized chaos, military efficiency imposed upon medical emergency. Triage areas had been established in parking lots and lobbies. The worst injuries were treated in makeshift operating theaters, while the walking wounded waited in corridors. Most disturbing were the isolation wards, glass-walled rooms containing people in various stages of infection, being monitored and studied by medical staff in full hazmat suits. I was brought to a conference room that had been converted into a command center. Medical officers conferred with military personnel around maps showing infection spread and quarantine effectiveness. A civilian doctor in rumpled scrubs appeared to be in charge of the medical response, a middle-aged woman with steel-grey hair and the exhausted determination of someone fighting a losing battle. Dr. Patel, my escort introduced her. This is Derek Lowe, CDC employee, claims to have treatment samples from the Hoffman team. Dr. Patel's eyebrows rose. Hoffman? The virologist? We received no notification about a treatment breakthrough, because they weren't planning to share it, I explained, setting the container on the table. 43 doses of what Dr. Hoffman claims can halt early-stage infection progression and potentially provide immunity. He was reserving it for essential personnel, meaning himself and his team. And you decided to bring it here instead. Her expression was unreadable. People are dying by the thousands. Everyone deserves a chance, not just those deemed essential by the people who created this nightmare. Dr. Patel studied me for a long moment before nodding. Let's see what you've brought us. The next hour was a flurry of activity as the treatment was analyzed in the hospital's labs. Preliminary tests confirmed it contained compounds designed to block the pathogen's neural interface mechanisms, preventing it from hijacking the host's central nervous system. Whether it would work in humans was still unknown, but the theoretical foundation was sound. We need to test it, Dr. Patel decided. Early stage, infected with confirmed exposure, but minimal symptoms. The airstrike is scheduled for 3 a.m., I reminded her. Less than 40 minutes from now. I'm aware. She picked up a secure phone. Get me General Clark, Medical Command, Authorization Patel 7-3. While she spoke with Military Command, I wandered to the window overlooking the hospital entrance. The defensive perimeter remained intact, but the number of infected visible beyond the barricades had increased dramatically. They moved with unsettling coordination, probing for weaknesses rather than mindlessly throwing themselves at established defenses. Dr. Patel joined me after completing her call. The General has agreed to a 1-hour delay on the airstrike, conditional on preliminary treatment results. We're selecting test subjects now. Volunteers from among the early-stage infected. Volunteers? There are people willing to risk an untested treatment? Medical staff who were exposed while treating patients. They know they're infected and what that means. This gives them a chance, however small. Within minutes, 5 volunteers had been selected, doctors and nurses showing the earliest signs of infection but still fully cognizant. The treatment was administered under strict protocols, with monitoring equipment tracking every physiological response. All we could do then was wait and watch for any sign of improvement or deterioration. 30 minutes later, the results defied everyone's expectations. 4 of the 5 volunteers showed significant reduction in infection markers, temperature normalizing, neurological symptoms receding, blood work trending toward normal parameters. The 5th showed slower improvement but was definitely responding. It's working, Dr. Patel breathed, reviewing the data. Not a cure, but definitely slowing progression dramatically. If administered early enough, the body's immune system might be able to fight off the infection entirely. So we can stop the airstrike? I asked hopefully. No. Her expression hardened. We can delay it, gain time to evacuate more civilians and treat early-stage infected. But containment is still necessary. The fully transformed infected can't be treated with this protocol. They're too far gone. And they're still spreading, still evolving. But we have a treatment for 43 people with no immediate way to produce more. She sighed heavily. I've already requested emergency production at CDC facilities outside the quarantine zone, but it will take days to synthesize significant quantities. The airstrike has been delayed 6 hours until 9 a.m. That gives us time to evacuate as many uninfected and early-stage infected as possible and begin treatment protocols with the doses we have. It wasn't the salvation I'd hoped for, but it was something. Thousands more might be saved in those 6 hours. I helped coordinate evacuation efforts, identifying priority treatment candidates among the early-stage infected and assisting with triage. The doses were carefully rationed, each recipient selected based on symptom progression and likelihood of response. As dawn broke over Atlanta, military helicopters continued evacuating civilians from designated extraction points throughout the city. The treatment had been proven effective enough that military command was now fully committed to saving as many people as possible before the inevitable airstrike. I was assisting with evacuee processing when a commotion at the perimeter drew attention. A military Humvee approached at high speed, soldiers waving it through without the usual security checks. It screeched to a halt at the command center entrance, and 2 figures emerged, Dr. Hoffman and Commander Davis. They spotted me immediately, Davis's hand moving to his sidearm before military police intervened. Dr. Patel emerged from the command center, interposing herself between us. Dr. Hoffman, she acknowledged coolly, your treatment protocol is showing remarkable efficacy. You should be proud. It was not intended for wide distribution at this stage, Hoffman replied stiffly. The doses were allocated for key research personnel to ensure continued development. You mean for yourself and your team, Dr. Patel corrected. Meanwhile, we've successfully treated 37 individuals with early-stage infection, all of whom are now showing signs of recovery. The remaining doses are being reserved for infected children. Hoffman flinched at that, perhaps the first sign of humanity I'd seen from him. The treatment is still experimental. The long-term effects are better than certain death, Dr. Patel finished. Now, if you've come to assist with evacuation efforts, we welcome the help. If not, please don't interfere with those who are trying to save lives. Davis stepped forward, ignoring the warning looks from military personnel. Lowe stole government property and compromised national security protocols. He needs to be detained immediately. Mr. Lowe delivered life-saving treatment to a disaster zone, Dr. Patel countered. As far as I'm concerned, he's a hero, not a criminal, and these patients— She gestured to the treatment ward where recovering infected were being prepared for evacuation— would certainly agree. The standoff might have escalated further, but an urgent call from the perimeter interrupted. The infected were massing for a coordinated assault on the hospital defenses, hundreds of them moving with tactical precision that shocked even the veteran soldiers. The outer barricades were already being breached. All non-essential personnel to evacuation transports immediately, came the announcement over the PA system. Defensive teams to designated positions. This is not a drill. Davis was immediately commandeered by the military commander, his tactical experience more valuable than his grudge against me. Hoffman was escorted to an evacuation helicopter along with the other medical specialists. Dr. Patel refused to leave while patients remained, coordinating the evacuation of the treatment ward with calm efficiency. I found myself helping load the last patients onto transport helicopters as gunfire intensified at the perimeter. The infected had breached the outer defenses and were advancing toward the hospital proper. Soldiers fought a fighting retreat, buying time for the final evacuations. The last patient, a nurse who had been among the first treatment recipients, was secured on a helicopter when Dr. Patel turned to me. That's it. We're the last non-military personnel. Let's go. We ran toward the final evacuation helicopter, its rotors already spinning up for immediate departure. Behind us, the infected broke through the inner perimeter, overwhelming the remaining defenders through sheer numbers. We were 20 yards from the helicopter when Dr. Patel stumbled, ankle turning on debris scattered across the landing zone. I stopped to help her up, precious seconds ticking away as the infected closed the distance. We reached the helicopter just as the first infected reached the edge of the landing zone. The pilot was yelling for us to hurry, door gunner already firing to keep the advancing horde at bay. Dr. Patel climbed aboard, turning to pull me up after her. Our hands clasped, and then agony exploded across my back as something slammed into me from behind. I fell forward, Dr. Patel's grip breaking as I hit the concrete. Hands clawed at my legs, dragging me backward away from the helicopter. "Go!" I screamed as the door gunner fired over my head, temporarily driving back my attackers. "Get the treatment data out!" The helicopter lifted off, Dr. Patel's horrified face the last thing I saw before I turned to face the infected, swarming the landing zone. I had seconds at most before they overwhelmed me completely. In that moment, I thought of Marlene, hoping she'd made it out of the city, hoping the treatment we'd delivered would eventually save millions, even if it couldn't save me. The infected closed in, their formerly human faces twisted into masks of hunger and rage. I backed toward the edge of the roof, unwilling to be taken alive, to become one of them. The city burned below, military aircraft already circling in preparation for the delayed but inevitable airstrike. Atlanta would fall, but humanity would survive. The treatment would be synthesized in other facilities, distributed to other outbreak zones. This nightmare would eventually end, just not for me. As the infected rushed forward in their final assault, I made my choice. I turned and jumped from the roof, preferring the quick end of gravity to the horror of transformation. The wind rushed past my ears, the ground rising to meet me with terminal finality. My last thought was oddly peaceful, that sometimes the greatest heroism comes from the most ordinary people in the most extraordinary circumstances. Atlanta would burn, but from its ashes, hope would rise. Sometimes that's the best anyone can hope for at the end of the world. The next stories, I never thought the end of the world would smell like crude oil and blood. My name's Caleb Horton, and until 6 days ago, I was just another roughneck working Rig 14 about 40 miles outside Houston. Good pay, hard work, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. Simple life. Now I'm probably the last living soul in a 100-mile radius who isn't either dead or walking dead. It started on a Tuesday. The sky was that perfect Texas blue that makes you forget how hot it is, and we were 14 hours into a 24-hour shift. I was checking pressure gauges when Martinez came stumbling up the metal stairs, sweating more than usual. "Caleb," he said, voice cracking, "something's wrong with Foreman Becker." I followed Martinez down to the main platform where Becker was bent over, retching black fluid onto the metal grating. His skin had gone grey, and dark veins stood out across his neck like inky rivers. The other guys had formed a semicircle around him, nobody wanting to get too close. "Becker, man, you need a medic," I said, approaching slowly. He looked up at me, and I'll remember that moment until the day I die, which might not be far off now. His eyes had gone milky white, pupils barely visible beneath the haze. Blood vessels had burst in the whites, giving them a marbled red appearance. When he opened his mouth to speak, his teeth were stained black. "The coolant," he managed to say. "They said it was fine." Then he collapsed. Williams, the safety officer, rushed forward to check his pulse. "He's burning up," Williams said, pulling his hand back like he'd touched a hot stove. "Jesus, he must be running a fever of 106, maybe higher." None of us knew then that Williams had just signed his death warrant by touching Becker. None of us knew anything. We were just a bunch of oil workers 60 feet up on a metal platform in the middle of nowhere, watching our foreman die from something none of us understood. Becker started convulsing 5 minutes later. His back arched so severely I thought his spine would snap. Then he went still, stone cold still. Williams was still kneeling next to him, trying to figure out what to do, when Becker's eyes snapped open again. Only they weren't eyes anymore, just vacant, hungry windows into nothing. He lunged at Williams, teeth first, going straight for his throat. The scream that came out of Williams still haunts me. It wasn't just pain or fear, it was the sound of someone who knows they're dying and can't believe it's happening. Blood sprayed across the platform as Becker tore into Williams's neck, his teeth ripping through flesh like it was nothing. The rest of us just stood there, paralyzed. This wasn't something that happened in real life. This was something from those horror movies my ex-girlfriend used to make me watch. Except it was happening 20 feet in front of me. The sounds all too real, the wet tearing of flesh, the gurgling of Williams trying to scream through a ruined throat, the animal grunts coming from what used to be our foreman. Martinez was the first to act. He grabbed a pipe wrench, a big 30-inch behemoth we used for the main valve assembly, and swung it straight at Becker's head. There was a sickening crunch, and Becker toppled sideways, still clutching chunks of Williams in his fists. "What the fuck?" shouted Rodriguez, backing away. "What the actual fuck?" "Call emergency services," I said, finding my voice. "Now!" Phillips pulled out his phone, but the expression on his face told me what I already knew. We were in a dead zone. The company had been promising to install signal boosters for months, but like everything else that didn't directly affect production, it had been put on the back burner. "Radio in the command center," I said. "Go!" Phillips and Rodriguez took off running toward the small shed that served as our on-site office. Martinez and I stayed with what remained of Williams and Becker. Williams wasn't moving anymore, but the blood pooling beneath him was still spreading across the metal grating, dripping down to the levels below. "We need to secure this area," I said, trying to think practically despite the horror unfolding before me. "If this is some kind of infection—" Before I could finish, Williams began to twitch. It started as small tremors in his fingers, then spread to his arms and legs. Martinez and I backed away. "No way," Martinez whispered. "No fucking way." Williams rose up, movements jerky and unnatural. His head lolled to one side, the gaping wound in his neck still pumping out what little blood he had left. His eyes had that same milky film that Becker's had. I didn't hesitate this time. I grabbed the pipe wrench from where it had fallen and swung it as hard as I could at Williams' head. The impact sent him sprawling, but unlike a normal person, he didn't try to protect himself as he fell. He just crashed to the metal grating, then immediately started trying to get back up. I brought the wrench down again and again, until what was left didn't look like Williams anymore. Martinez threw up over the railing. I didn't blame him. "We need to warn the others," I said, my voice sounding strangely calm even to my own ears. We headed toward the command center, but halfway there we heard the screams, multiple voices crying out in pain and terror. Gunshots, probably from the security officer's sidearm, then more screams. "The coolant," I said, suddenly remembering Becker's last words. What was he talking about? "The new industrial coolant," Martinez said, eyes wide with realization. "The stuff they started using last week for the drill bits. Came from some university research lab. Becker was the only one who handled the drums when they arrived." My blood ran cold. I'd seen enough movies to have a terrible suspicion about what was happening. "We need to get off this rig," I said. "Now!" "But the others—" Another scream cut through the air, closer this time, followed by a wet, gurgling sound that couldn't mean anything good. "We can't help them if we're dead," I said. "Come on." We ran toward the helipad. There was no helicopter scheduled for today, but it was the highest point on the rig, and the emergency supply kit was stored there. Maybe we could call for help with the emergency radio. We never made it to the helipad. Rodriguez came stumbling around the corner of the tool shed, but it wasn't really Rodriguez anymore. His coveralls were soaked with blood, and chunks of flesh hung from his mouth. Behind him came Phillips in the same condition. Martinez froze. Madre de Dios! I grabbed his arm. Run! We turned and sprinted back the way we'd come, the shambling forms of our former colleagues in pursuit. They weren't fast, but they were relentless, and there were only so many places to run on an oil rig. We ducked into the main pump room and slammed the heavy metal door shut. I threw the bolt lock and we backed away, breathing hard. "What's happening, Caleb?" Martinez asked, his voice breaking. "What the hell is happening?" "I don't know," I said, "but it looks like every zombie movie I've ever seen." "Don't say that," he snapped. "This isn't a movie. This is real life." "Then you explain it," I said, "because I just had to bash in the heads of 2 guys I've worked with for 3 years. Martinez sank to the floor, head in his hands. "This can't be happening." Outside, fists began to pound against the metal door. Not coordinated, just constant, mindless pounding. They knew we were in here. "The new coolant," I said, thinking out loud. "Becker said it came from a university lab. What if it's some kind of experimental chemical, something that affects the brain?" Martinez looked up. "Like a weapon?" "I don't know. Maybe not intentionally, but..." The pounding at the door got louder, more fists joining in. How many of the crew had turned? "We need weapons," I said, looking around the pump room. There were tools everywhere, wrenches, pipes, a couple of fire axes on the wall. "And then what?" Martinez asked. "Kill everyone on the rig? There's 27 men out there." "If they're trying to eat us, we don't have much choice," I said, grabbing one of the fire axes. I handed the other to Martinez. "We need to get to the radio in the command center." The pounding at the door continued, and now I could hear moaning, low, hungry sounds that didn't resemble human speech. "If we go out there, we die," Martinez said. "If we stay here, we die slower," I replied. "This room doesn't have any food or water." "Eventually, we'll have to leave." Martinez took the fire axe from me with shaking hands. "I've got a family, Caleb. A wife, 2 little girls. All the more reason to try to survive," I said. "Ready?" He nodded, his expression hardening. I moved toward the door, positioning myself to swing as soon as I opened it. 3, 2, 1. I threw the bolt and pulled the door open. 5 of our crewmates stood there, their expressions blank, eyes clouded over. I didn't hesitate. I swung the axe directly at the nearest one's head. Cooper, a guy who'd just shown me pictures of his newborn son last week. The axe blade sank into his skull with a wet thunk, and he dropped like a stone. Martinez was less decisive. He hesitated when faced with Riley, who'd been his fishing buddy. That hesitation cost him. Riley lunged forward, sinking his teeth into Martinez's arm. Martinez screamed and swung the axe wildly, catching Riley in the shoulder rather than the head. Riley didn't even flinch, just kept biting and tearing. I dispatched the other 3 as quickly as I could, aiming for headshots each time, trying not to think about the fact that these were men I'd worked with, joked with, shared meals with. When they were down, I turned to help Martinez, but it was too late. Riley had torn a massive chunk from his forearm, and Martinez was on his knees, already going into shock from blood loss and pain. "Go!" he gasped, looking up at me with clear eyes. "Get help! Tell my family I love them." "I'm not leaving you," I said, raising my axe to take out Riley. "You have to," Martinez said. "I'm already dead." We both know how this works. He was right. I'd seen enough to know that once you were bitten, it was just a matter of time. Still, I couldn't just leave him. "Give me your axe," I said. He understood. He handed me the axe with his good arm. I took it, then raised my own. "I'll make it quick," I promised. "Gracias, amigo," he said, closing his eyes. "I won't describe what I did next. Some things you carry with you to the grave, and that's one of them. All I'll say is that I kept my promise. It was quick. Alone now, I made my way carefully through the rig. Every corner could hide another former friend turned mindless killer. The rig felt eerily quiet between bursts of distant screams and inhuman moaning. I encountered 3 more of the infected on my way to the command center. I dealt with them as quickly and humanely as I could, if you can call caving in a man's skull humane. The command center door was ajar when I reached it. Blood smeared the handle. I took a deep breath and pushed it open with the handle of my axe. Inside, the security officer Dawson lay sprawled across the radio console. His sidearm was still clutched in his hand, the slide locked back. Empty. His skull had been partially caved in, but not by a weapon. The marks looked like teeth, human teeth that had gnawed through bone. I approached cautiously, axe raised, but Dawson wasn't moving. He was actually dead, not undead. Small mercy. I pushed his body aside as respectfully as I could and examined the radio. It was intact, but covered in blood. I grabbed the microphone and tried to call for help. Mayday, Mayday, this is Rig 14. We have a medical emergency, multiple casualties, unknown contagion, request immediate evacuation. Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting the frequencies, trying different channels, nothing but static. Then I noticed the back of the unit had been damaged, bullet holes. In his final moments, Dawson must have fired wildly, hitting the radio's internal components. We were truly cut off. I sank into the chair, the reality of my situation crushing down on me. Everyone on the rig was either dead or turned. No radio, no cell signal. The next crew change wasn't scheduled for 5 days. By then, I'd either be dead or one of those things. I was contemplating my extremely limited options when something on one of the security monitors caught my eye. A helicopter was approaching the rig. Relief flooded through me. Someone had heard the Mayday after all. Then I looked closer at the helicopter. It wasn't one of our company birds. It was black, unmarked, and military in design. As it got closer, I could make out men in tactical gear inside. The helicopter circled the rig once, not coming in to land. A second black helicopter appeared, then a third. They maintained a perimeter around the rig, just watching. I ran up to the helipad, waving my arms frantically, trying to signal them. One helicopter broke from the formation and hovered closer. I could see the men inside clearly now. They wore what looked like hazmat suits under their tactical gear. One was pointing a camera or some kind of scanning device at the rig. "Help!" I shouted, knowing they couldn't hear me over the rotor noise, but unable to stop myself. "People are dying down here." The helicopter hovered for another minute, then rejoined the others. All 3 maintained their distance, just watching. It was then I realized they had no intention of landing. They weren't here to rescue us. They were here to contain us. As this realization sank in, I noticed something else. Smoke was rising from the southern end of the rig. Fire! And an oil rig is just about the worst place for a fire. I ran toward the smoke. The fire had started in the mess hall, probably a stove left on when the chaos began. The flames were already spreading, feeding on the industrial cleaning supplies stored nearby. I knew I should try to fight the fire, but with what? The fire suppression systems were controlled from the main engineering deck, and I'd have to fight my way through God knows how many infected to get there. Even if I did, I had no idea how to activate the systems. The decision was made for me when the first explosion rocked the rig. One of the smaller propane tanks used for the kitchen had ignited. The blast knocked me off my feet and sent a fireball 30 feet into the air. That was when I knew. I wasn't getting off this rig alive. I retreated to the highest point I could find, the crane operator's cabin. From there I could see the fire spreading rapidly across the rig. More explosions followed the first, as various flammable materials ignited. The military helicopters maintained their distance, observing the destruction. As night fell, the rig had become a giant torch in the darkness. The infected still wandered aimlessly through the inferno, oblivious to the flames consuming them. It was both terrible and fascinating to watch them continue to move, even as they burned, only stopping when the fire had destroyed their brains or locomotion became physically impossible. From my vantage point, I could see lights on the horizon. Houston, home to millions of people who had no idea what was coming, because something was coming. Whatever had been in that coolant, whatever had turned my friends into monsters, it had to have come from somewhere. Becca had mentioned a university lab. I found a pair of binoculars in the crane cabin and trained them on the helicopters still circling in the darkness. In the light of the burning rig, I could now make out markings on one of them, small lettering that read USAMRIID. I recognized the acronym from a documentary I'd watched years ago. United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, the military's premier biodefense laboratory. They knew what this was. This wasn't some random accident. This was something they'd created, or were at least familiar with. And now it had gotten loose. I spent that night in the crane cabin, watching the rig burn beneath me. By morning, the structure had begun to weaken. Metal groaned as supports warped from the heat. It was only a matter of time before the whole thing collapsed. The military helicopters had departed, replaced by a single Coast Guard vessel, maintaining a perimeter about 2 miles from the rig. They weren't coming any closer. They were quarantining the area. I needed to get off the rig, not just to save myself, but to warn people. If this contagion reached the mainland, the results would be catastrophic. I searched the crane cabin and found an emergency kit with flares, a first aid kit, and a life vest. Not much to work with. The rig had 2 lifeboats, but they were located on the level that was now fully engulfed in flames. There was no way to reach them. The emergency life rafts were similarly inaccessible. That left swimming. It was at least 5 miles to shore, a long swim under normal circumstances, nearly impossible given my exhausted state and the Gulf's currents. But what choice did I have? I stripped off my coveralls and boots, keeping only my t-shirt and underwear. I put on the life vest and strapped the small waterproof emergency kit to my waist. Then I climbed down from the crane as far as I could before the heat became unbearable. Looking down at the dark water below, I hesitated. If I missed and hit the rig structure instead of the water, it would be a quick death. If I made it into the water but couldn't reach shore, it would be a slower one. Another explosion rocked the rig, making the decision for me. The crane lurched sickeningly, and I lost my grip. I fell, tumbling through smoke and heat, before hitting the water with enough force to drive the air from my lungs. The cold Gulf water closed over my head. The impact had stunned me, and for a moment I couldn't remember which way was up. The life vest decided for me, pulling me toward the surface. I broke through, gasping, the burning rig now looming above me like some vision of hell. I swam away from the rig as quickly as I could, not wanting to be pulled under if it collapsed. When I judged I was at a safe distance, I turned to float on my back, conserving energy while I considered my next move. The Coast Guard vessel was visible in the distance, lights blinking in the pre-dawn gloom. If I swam toward them, would they pick me up or consider me contaminated and leave me to drown? I had no way of knowing. The current was pushing me southeast, away from both the shore and the Coast Guard. That made the decision easier. I had to fight the current and make for land. I oriented myself using the lights of Houston and began to swim. Hours passed. The sun rose, then climbed higher, beating down on me without mercy. My arms and legs burned with fatigue, but I kept going. Whenever I felt like giving up, I thought of Martinez asking me to tell his family he loved them. I thought of the millions of people in Houston who had no idea what might be coming their way. It was mid-afternoon when I finally dragged myself onto a deserted stretch of beach, miles from where I had intended to land. I collapsed on the sand, too exhausted to move, the hot sun baking my salt-crusted skin. I must have passed out, because when I next opened my eyes, the sun was setting. I sat up slowly, every muscle screaming in protest. I was alive, but now what? I needed to find a phone, call someone who could help. But who? The police? They'd think I was crazy. The CDC, maybe. Did they even have a public number? I got to my feet and took stock of my surroundings. I was on a stretch of industrial coastline with refineries visible in both directions. No houses or businesses in immediate sight. I picked a direction and started walking. An hour later, I came across a small gas station and convenience store just off the coastal highway. An old pickup truck was parked out front, the driver inside paying for gas. I must have looked like a castaway, sunburned, salt-crusted, wearing nothing but a t-shirt, underwear, and a life vest. The store clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, did a double take when I staggered in. "Sweet Jesus, honey, what happened to you? You fall off a boat." "Something like that," I said, my voice raspy from thirst and smoke inhalation. "Can I use your phone? It's an emergency." She handed me an old cordless phone from behind the counter. "You want me to call an ambulance?" "No," I said quickly. "Just the phone." I dialed 911, not knowing who else to call. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional. "My name is Caleb Horton. I'm a survivor from Rig 14. There's been an outbreak of some kind of infection. Everyone else is dead or—" I hesitated, knowing how insane it would sound. Or changed. They became violent, attacked each other. The military knows about it. They quarantined the rig instead of rescuing us. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, did you say you're from Petrochem Rig 14? "Yes," I said, hope rising. They knew about the rig already. "Please stay where you are, sir. We're sending emergency services to your location." "You believe me?" I asked, surprised. "We've received several reports regarding Rig 14, sir. Please remain at your current location. Help is on the way." I gave them the address of the gas station and hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and suspicion. They'd responded too calmly to my story. Something wasn't right. The clerk was staring at me. "You're from that rig that's burning?" "It's all over the news. They're saying it was a pressure valve failure." "It wasn't," I said. "Can I see the news?" She turned up the volume on a small TV behind the counter. A female reporter was standing on a beach with the burning rig visible in the distance behind her. Petrochem officials confirm that all hands are presumed lost in the catastrophic explosion that rocked Rig 14 early this morning. The Coast Guard has established a 5-mile exclusion zone around the disaster site due to concerns about structural collapse and possible environmental contamination from the burning crude oil. Petrochem CEO Victor Harmon issued a statement expressing deep sorrow for the loss of life and promising a full investigation. "They're lying," I said. "It wasn't an explosion. It was—" I stopped. The clerk was already looking at me like I was crazy, and outside I could see flashing lights approaching. Not an ambulance, police cruisers, 3 of them. "I need to go," I said suddenly. "But you called for help," the clerk said, confused. "That's not help," I said, moving toward the back of the store. "Is there another exit?" "Just the delivery door, but—" I was already moving, pushing through a swinging door into the storeroom. I found the delivery entrance and shoved it open, setting off an alarm. Outside was a small parking lot, and beyond that, scrubland. I ran, ignoring the pain in my bare feet as they slapped against the asphalt. Behind me I heard shouting. They weren't calling my name or identifying themselves as police. They were just shouting to each other, "Target is fleeing!" and "Cut him off!" I hit the scrubland and kept running, the coarse grass and occasional cacti tearing at my feet. It was almost fully dark now, which worked in my favor. I ran until I couldn't hear the shouting anymore, then found a drainage ditch to hide in. As I lay there trying to quiet my breathing, the reality of my situation sank in. I was being hunted. Whatever had happened on that rig, someone wanted to keep it quiet. The military, Petrochem, maybe both. And I was a loose end. I needed a plan. I needed clothes, shoes, money. I needed to contact someone who could help expose what had happened, a journalist maybe. But first, I needed to survive the night and figure out exactly where I was. I stayed in that drainage ditch until the search seemed to die down. No flashlight beams swept across the scrubland anymore. No voices called out commands. I crawled out and oriented myself using the distant lights of what I assumed was Houston, then began walking, keeping low and sticking to cover where possible. After about an hour, I came across a small cluster of houses, some kind of rural community on the outskirts of the city. Most of the houses were dark, but one had clothes hanging on a line in the backyard. I hated the idea of stealing, but I was desperate. I grabbed a pair of jeans, a flannel shirt, and thankfully, a pair of boots that someone had left outside their back door. They were a size too big, but better than nothing. Dressed now, I felt marginally more human. I continued toward the city lights, eventually reaching a road with occasional traffic. I kept to the shadows, not wanting to be seen. Every vehicle that passed made me tense up, expecting it to be police or whoever else might be looking for me. It was nearly midnight when I reached the outskirts of Houston proper. I found a 24-hour diner and slipped inside, taking a booth in the back corner. I had no money, but I needed information more than food at this point. A waitress approached, pad in hand. "What can I get you, honey?" "Just water for now," I said. "I'm waiting for someone." She nodded and brought me a glass of ice water, which I gulped down gratefully. The diner had a TV mounted in the corner, tuned to a local news channel. I watched, hoping for more information about the rig. The news had moved on to other stories, a political scandal, a celebrity divorce, sports highlights, nothing about mysterious infections or military quarantines, just normal life continuing as if the world wasn't about to change forever. Because I knew it was. Whatever had turned my crewmates into those things, it had been created in a lab. It had gotten loose once. It would get loose again. Maybe it already had. I was considering my next move when the diner door opened and 2 police officers walked in. My heart rate doubled instantly. Had they tracked me here? But they headed straight for the counter, not even glancing in my direction. Just a regular coffee break, it seemed. Still, I couldn't risk staying. I slid out of the booth and headed for the restroom at the back of the diner. There had to be a rear exit. All restaurants had them, right? I found it. A delivery entrance next to the kitchen. I pushed it open carefully and slipped out into an alley. From there, I moved deeper into the city, staying on side streets and avoiding main thoroughfares. I had no destination in mind, just an instinct to keep moving, to put distance between myself and anyone who might be looking for me. Hours passed as I wandered through Houston in the dead of night. The city felt surreal, millions of people sleeping peacefully, unaware of what I'd seen. Would they all become like Becca and the others? Was I carrying the contagion myself? I didn't think so. I hadn't had direct contact with the coolant, and I'd been in the water for hours. Surely any surface contamination would have washed away. As dawn approached, I found myself in a residential neighborhood of modest homes. People would be waking up soon, heading to work or school, normal life continuing. I couldn't be seen wandering the streets in daylight. I'd draw too much attention. I spotted a house with a detached garage that looked rarely used. Judging by the untended garden path leading to it, it might provide temporary shelter. I made my way to the back of the property, found the garage unlocked, and slipped inside. It was mostly empty, except for some old furniture covered in drop cloths and boxes of what looked like Christmas decorations. Perfect for my needs. I cleared a space behind a large bookshelf, made a nest of drop cloths, and finally allowed myself to rest. I slept fitfully, waking at every sound, imagining the infected breaking down the door or military men in hazmat suits dragging me away. When I finally gave up on sleep and checked my watch, which had somehow survived my ordeal, it was mid-afternoon. I was desperately thirsty and hungry, but those needs would have to wait until nightfall. I used the time to think, to plan. I needed to contact someone who would listen to my story and had the power to do something about it. A major newspaper maybe, or a TV station. But even if I found a journalist willing to listen, would they believe me? I had no evidence, nothing except my word. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I froze, listening intently. Car doors opened and closed. Voices, a man and a woman, talking casually about grocery shopping. The homeowners, not people hunting for me. Still, I remained perfectly still until I heard them enter the house. Once they were inside, I crept to the small, dirty window of the garage and peered out. I could see part of their kitchen through their window. They had a TV on, and I strained to see if there was any news about the rig, or God forbid an outbreak in the city. The TV was showing what looked like a press conference. I couldn't hear the audio, but the caption at the bottom of the screen read, CDC Press Briefing, Gulf Coast Health Alert. My blood ran cold. It was starting. I needed to see that broadcast. I looked around the garage for anything that might help me. There was an old radio on a workbench covered in dust. I tried turning it on, but the batteries were long dead. Night couldn't come fast enough. As soon as darkness fell, I slipped out of the garage and made my way back to the streets. I needed to find some place where I could watch the news, a bar maybe, or another diner. I walked for about half an hour before finding a sports bar with multiple TVs visible through the windows. I went inside and took a seat at the counter. The place was about half full, mostly people watching a baseball game on the main screens. "What can I get you?" the bartender asked. I had no money. "Just water for now. Had a long day." He gave me a slightly suspicious look, but brought me the water. One of the smaller TVs in the corner was tuned to a news channel. I watched it while trying not to look too interested. The CDC press conference was being replayed. A serious-looking woman in a blazer was speaking at a podium covered in microphones. Advising residents of coastal areas between Galveston and Corpus Christi to be alert for symptoms including high fever, disorientation, and unusual bruising or discoloration of the skin around the neck and face. These may indicate exposure to an industrial contaminant released during the Rig 14 incident. If you or someone you know exhibits these symptoms, do not approach them. Call emergency services immediately and inform the operator that you're reporting a possible Gulf Coast exposure case. My heart was pounding. They were acknowledging something had been released, but they were calling it an industrial contaminant, not an infection, and they were telling people not to approach those showing symptoms. They knew it was contagious, that it turned people violent. The bartender noticed my intense focus on the news. "You from the coast?" he asked. I hesitated, then decided a partial truth might get me more information. "Yeah, got family in Galveston. What's this about an industrial spill?" He shook his head. "Been all over the news today. That oil rig that blew up yesterday? They're saying it might have released some kind of chemical into the air. Health department's going nuts, telling people to report anyone acting strange or looking sick." "Anyone actually reported sick yet?" I asked, trying to sound casually concerned rather than desperately terrified. "Not that they're saying publicly, but—" He leaned in. "My cousin's a paramedic in Galveston. Says they got called to a house this morning. Whole family sick with exactly those symptoms they're describing on TV. When they got there, the family attacked them, like physically attacked them. One of the EMTs got bitten so bad he needed surgery." My blood ran cold. "What happened to the family?" "Police took them into custody is all I know. My cousin said they were acting like animals, like they didn't even understand what was happening around them." He shrugged, "Probably high on something. Bath salts or whatever the new thing is." "Yeah, probably," I agreed, not believing it for a second. The news had moved on to other stories. But I'd seen enough. It had reached the mainland. The infection, the contagion, whatever it was spreading. I needed to get word out about what I'd seen, what I knew. The public story about an industrial contaminant wasn't going to prepare people for what was coming. They needed to know the truth, that this turned people into mindless, violent creatures that spread the infection through bites. But who would listen? Who would believe me? And who could actually do something about it? I remembered a name from the news broadcast about the rig, Victor Harman, the CEO of Petrochem. He had issued a statement about the accident. He had to know the truth. Maybe he was even part of the cover-up. Either way, he would have information. "Is there a library around here?" I asked the bartender. "Need to check my email, let my family know I'm okay." Another lie, but a necessary one. He gave me directions to a public library about 6 blocks away. It would be closed at this hour, but there was an internet cafe next door that stayed open late. I thanked him and left, feeling guilty about not being able to pay for even the water he'd served me. Add it to the list of sins I was accumulating in the name of survival. The internet cafe was still open, as promised. I paid for an hour of computer time with some spare change I'd found in the pockets of the stolen jeans, just enough for 30 minutes. I searched for information about Victor Harman and Petrochem. Victor Harman was a prominent figure in Houston's business community. He'd been CEO of Petrochem for 8 years, taking the company from a mid-sized oil producer to one of the largest in Texas. He lived in River Oaks, the wealthiest neighborhood in Houston, and was known for his philanthropy, particularly his support of medical research. Medical research. That caught my eye. I dug deeper and found that Harman sat on the board of the Houston Advanced Research Center, which partnered with several universities on biomedical projects. One of those universities was the same one that had supplied the new coolant for our rig. The connection was too strong to be coincidental. Harman knew something. He might even be directly involved. I needed to talk to him, to confront him. It was a desperate plan, but I had nothing else. I found his address, or at least the general area where he lived. River Oaks was an exclusive, gated community with private security. Getting to Harman wouldn't be easy, but I had to try. I left the internet cafe and started walking toward River Oaks. It was several miles away, but I had no money for transportation. As I walked, I passed more police cars than usual, and twice I saw military vehicles. Humvees with some kind of symbol on the doors that I couldn't make out in the darkness. They were mobilizing, preparing. They knew what was coming. It took me 3 hours to reach the outskirts of River Oaks. The neighborhood was as exclusive as I'd expected. Large houses set back from the street, high walls, security cameras everywhere. I couldn't just walk up to Harman's front door. I needed another approach. I circled the perimeter of the neighborhood, looking for service entrances, maintenance access, anything that might get me inside without going through the main gates. I found what I was looking for on the western edge, a service road for landscapers and other contractors. There was a gate, but it wasn't as well monitored as the main entrance. I waited in the shadows, watching. Every 20 minutes or so, a private security vehicle drove past. Between patrols, the service entrance was unattended. If I was quick, I could climb over. I waited for the security car to pass, then sprinted to the gate. It was about 8 feet high, with ornamental spikes at the top. Challenging, but not impossible. I found handholds in the decorative metalwork and hauled myself up, carefully navigating past the spikes at the top before dropping down on the other side. Now I was inside River Oaks, but I still had to find Harman's house. I stayed off the main roads, keeping to the shadows of the large properties. Most houses had their street numbers prominently displayed, making navigation easier than I'd expected. It took me about 45 minutes of careful movement to reach Harman's address. The house was massive, a modern mansion with extensive grounds. Security lights illuminated the perimeter, and I could see cameras mounted at strategic points, Getting inside wouldn't be simple. I circled the property, looking for vulnerabilities. The house backed onto a small wooded area that provided some cover. From there, I could approach with less risk of being spotted. I made my way through the trees until I reached the edge of the manicured lawn. The back of the house featured large windows and a patio area with outdoor furniture. Through the windows, I could see lights on inside. Someone was home. I was contemplating my next move when I heard voices approaching from the direction of the house. I pressed myself against a tree, trying to blend into the shadows. Two men walked onto the patio. One I recognized from photos as Victor Harmon, tall, distinguished, with silver hair. The other was younger, wearing what looked like a military uniform, though I couldn't make out the insignia from this distance. They were deep in conversation, their voices just loud enough for me to catch fragments. "Containment protocols failing already," the military man was saying. "I told you this could happen," Harmon replied, his voice tense. "The substrate was unstable. It needed more testing before field trials. The opportunity was perfect. An isolated platform, controlled conditions. Those were my employees, Colonel. Real people. Acceptable losses for what we're gaining. The data from this outbreak is invaluable." I felt sick. They had used us as guinea pigs. The coolant, the infection. It had been deliberate. "And when it reaches downtown," Harmon asked, "still acceptable losses?" "By then we'll have enough information to synthesize a more controllable strain. This is just the first iteration. Think of the potential applications, Harmon. A bioweapon that creates its own delivery system. Infect a few, and they do the rest of the work for you." "That wasn't the original purpose of this research," Harmon said, but his protest sounded weak, performative. "The government funded your research with certain expectations. You knew what we were working toward. I need more time with the samples from the initial outbreak. The mutation rate is faster than we anticipated. You'll have all the samples you need by morning. We're collecting subjects from Galveston now." I'd heard enough. This wasn't just an accident. It was a weapon test, and it was spreading exactly as they'd planned. I needed to document this somehow to get evidence. I reached for my phone before remembering I didn't have one. I looked around desperately for anything I could use. There was nothing. The men were moving back toward the house. Soon they'd be gone, and with them my chance to confirm what was happening. I made a decision, a reckless, possibly suicidal decision. I stepped out from the trees. "Victor Harmon," I called out. Both men spun around. The military officer immediately reached inside his jacket, likely for a weapon. "My name is Caleb Horton," I said, stepping forward with my hands raised. "I worked on Rig 14. I know what happened there." Harmon's face went pale. "How did you survive?" I finished for him. "I swam 5 miles through the Gulf while your military friends watched the rig burn. I heard what you just said. You used us as test subjects. The military man had indeed drawn a pistol and was aiming it at me. You've made a serious mistake coming here, Mr. Horton." "Maybe," I agreed, "but people need to know what you've done. What you're still doing. This infection, this weapon you've created, it's out of control, isn't it? That's why the CDC is already issuing warnings." "You understand nothing," the officer said coldly. "This is a matter of national security." "Colonel," Harmon said cautiously, "we should hear what he has to say. He survived direct exposure. That makes him valuable." The colonel kept his gun trained on me, but didn't fire. "Talk fast." "The infection spreads through bites," I said. "Once infected, victims turn within minutes. They maintain basic motor functions but lose all higher reasoning. They attack indiscriminately, spreading the infection. Headshots are the only way to stop them permanently." "We know all this," the colonel said dismissively. "Then you know it's already spreading in Galveston," I countered. "How long before it reaches Houston proper?" "Millions of people, Colonel. Is that an acceptable loss?" "We have containment protocols," They won't work, I interrupted. You said it yourself a minute ago. The containment is already failing. Harmon looked troubled. He's right, Colonel Danfield. The infection rate will be exponential once it reaches the city center. So the military man was Colonel Danfield. Good to put a name to one of the architects of this nightmare. What do you want, Mr. Horton? Harmon asked me directly. I want you to stop this, I said. Release the full details to the CDC. Tell people how to protect themselves. You must have been working on a cure or a vaccine alongside the weapon. Use it. Harmon and Danfield exchanged looks. There is no cure, Harmon said finally. We were focused on weaponization, not treatment. The project goal was irreversible infection. My heart sank. Then millions will die. Not if we contain the outbreak, Danfield insisted. We have protocols. Your protocols have already failed, I shouted. I'm standing here, aren't I? I got through your quarantine, your security. Others will too, carrying the infection with them. Harmon seemed to be considering my words. We could issue a more detailed warning. Give people a fighting chance. Absolutely not, Danfield snapped. That would cause panic and compromise the entire operation. What operation? I demanded. Testing your weapon on American citizens? Enough, Danfield said, raising his gun higher. Harmon, call security. This man is trespassing and delusional. He needs to be contained. Harmon hesitated. For a moment I thought I might have gotten through to him. Then he reached for his phone. I had to act. I lunged forward, trying to knock the gun from Danfield's hand. He fired, but the bullet went wide as we grappled. I was running on adrenaline and desperation, fighting for my life and the lives of millions of others. Harmon was shouting, backing away from our struggle. I managed to get my hand on Danfield's wrist, forcing the gun away from me. We crashed into a patio table, sending glasses and a bottle of whiskey shattering to the ground. Danfield was military trained, but I was a roughneck who'd spent years doing heavy physical labor. In terms of raw strength, we were evenly matched. The gun went off again, the bullet embedding itself in the wooden patio floor. Security would be here any minute. I had to end this quickly. I slammed my forehead into Danfield's nose, feeling it crunch under the impact. He howled in pain, his grip on the gun loosening just enough. I wrenched it from his hand and staggered backward, now aiming the weapon at both men. "Don't move!" I gasped, blood dripping into my eye from where I'd cut my forehead on Danfield's face. Danfield held a hand to his bleeding nose, his eyes cold with hatred. "You're a dead man, Horton." "Probably," I agreed. "But right now, I'm the man with the gun." "Harmon, put the phone down." Harmon complied, placing his phone on the patio table slowly. "Now, both of you, inside," I said, gesturing with the gun. "We're going to have a longer conversation about exactly what's happening and what we can do about it." I herded them through the patio doors into what appeared to be Harmon's study, a wood-paneled room with bookshelves, a large desk, and several computers. Perfect. "Sit down," I ordered, indicating 2 chairs. "Harmon, I want access to your files. Everything about this weapon, this infection, research data, communication with the military, all of it." "That's classified information," Danfield snarled. "Accessing it without clearance is treason." "Unleashing a bioweapon on American soil is worse than treason," I replied. "Harmon, the computer, now." Harmon moved to his desk and sat down at the computer. "What do you intend to do with this information?" "Send it to every news outlet I can. Put it online where it can't be taken down. People deserve to know what's happening and how to protect themselves." "You'll cause mass panic," Harmon argued. "Better panic than mass graves," I said. "Log in. Now." Harmon typed his password, and the computer came to life. "What specifically are you looking for?" "Project files related to the coolant, the infection." "Start with that." He began navigating through folders, opening a directory labeled Project Chimera. Inside were hundreds of files, research papers, video clips, spreadsheets with data. "Download everything to a USB drive," I instructed. There isn't enough space on a standard drive for all this, Harmon said. Then email the key files to major news networks. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all of them. Harmon hesitated. Once this gets out, there's no going back. The panic could kill as many people as the infection. The infection has a 100% fatality rate, I reminded him. At least with warning, some people will survive. Danfield chose that moment to make his move. He lunged from his chair, trying to tackle me. I fired without thinking, the gun bucking in my hand. Danfield collapsed, a red stain spreading across his chest. Harmon cried out in shock. I was nearly as surprised as he was. I'd never shot anyone before. "Is he?" Harmon began. I checked Danfield's pulse. "He's alive, but he needs medical attention soon." I turned back to Harmon. "The files. Now, or I can't guarantee I'll be as careful with my next shot." Harmon turned back to the computer, visibly shaken. "I never wanted this," he said as he worked. "The project was supposed to be about creating better vaccines, treatments for neurological disorders. The military funding came with conditions. They wanted to explore other applications." "And you went along with it," I said, no sympathy in my voice. "Yes," he admitted. "The money was too good, and the research was fascinating. We were rewriting the rules of neurology, creating compounds that could selectively target brain functions. But then they pushed for faster results, field tests. On an oil rig full of innocent workers, I finished for him. My friends." "I'm sorry," he said, and I think he actually meant it. "If it helps, I didn't know they planned to release it on the rig." That decision came from higher up. "It doesn't help," I said coldly. "Just send the files." He began attaching documents to emails, sending them to news outlets. I watched over his shoulder, making sure he wasn't trying anything deceptive. "Tell them what's happening," I instructed. "How the infection spreads, how to identify the infected, how to stop them." Harmon typed a brief explanation into the email body, describing the key facts about the infection. When he finished, he looked up at me. "What now?" "Now we wait," I said. "Once those emails are received and opened, the information will spread. They'll send reporters, camera crews. The truth will get out." "And you think that will help?" Harmon asked. "You think people will just calmly prepare?" "No," I admitted. "There will be panic. Chaos. But some will survive who otherwise wouldn't." We sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. Danfield's breathing was becoming more labored. He needed medical attention soon. "You should call an ambulance for him," I said finally. "They'll bring the police," Harmon pointed out. "I know, but I'm not a murderer, not yet." Harmon reached for his phone and dialed 911. He reported a shooting, gave his address, told them to hurry. "They'll be here in minutes," he said after hanging up. "What will you do?" "Try to stay alive long enough to see this through," I said. "The infection is spreading." Even with warning, many people won't believe it until it's too late. "No," Harmon agreed. "They won't." I heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. "It's time for me to go," I said. "Remember, you're as guilty as Danfield and the others. You can start making amends by making sure the truth stays out there. Don't let them silence you." I backed toward the door, still holding the gun. "Which way is least visible to approaching vehicles?" "Through the garden, past the pool house. There's a service gate that leads to the park behind the property." I nodded. "Good luck, Harmon. I hope you can live with yourself." I left him there with the wounded colonel and slipped out through the garden. The sirens were very close now. I ran past the pool house, found the service gate, and let myself out into the park beyond. From there I kept moving, putting as much distance as possible between myself and Harmon's house. I had done what I could. The information was out there now, or would be soon. Would it be enough? Probably not, but it was something. I kept the gun. I had a feeling I might need it in the days to come. The next morning I found a convenience store with a television. The news was on, but there was nothing about a zombie outbreak or a bioweapon. Instead, they were reporting on a serious industrial accident in Galveston that had released toxic fumes. Residents were being temporarily relocated while hazmat teams dealt with the situation. Harmon's emails must have been intercepted or dismissed as a hoax. The cover-up was continuing. I was considering my next move when a breaking news alert interrupted regular programming. The reporter looked genuinely shaken. "We're getting reports of a mass casualty event at Houston Memorial Hospital. Details are still coming in, but witnesses describe multiple assailants attacking hospital staff and patients. Police have cordoned off the area, and SWAT teams are on scene. We go now to our reporter on location. It had reached Houston. The containment had failed completely. Over the next 3 days, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The authorities maintained the fiction of toxic exposure causing extreme aggression for as long as they could. But as more videos appeared online showing people being bitten and then turning into mindless attackers themselves, the truth became impossible to hide. The military established a perimeter around downtown Houston, trying to contain the spread. It didn't work. Too many people had already fled, carrying the infection to surrounding communities. National Guard units were deployed to major highways, turning back refugees, sometimes with lethal force. I moved through the chaos like a ghost, stealing what I needed to survive, avoiding both the infected and the military. I tried to warn people when I could, telling them what I knew about the nature of the infection and how to defend against it. Some listened. Most didn't. The human mind resists the unthinkable, even when the unthinkable is shambling down the street toward you with bloody teeth. A week after my escape from the rig, half of Houston was overrun. The other half was descending into anarchy as supply chains collapsed and essential services failed. The military had pulled back to a defensive line around the city's wealthy western suburbs, protecting the homes of people like Harmon while abandoning the rest to their fate. I made my way to a community college where survivors had established a fortified compound. They had weapons, supplies, and a plan to evacuate to a more defensible location in the hill country. I joined them, sharing my knowledge about the infection and its origins. Some believed me. Others thought I was crazy. It didn't matter as long as they knew how to kill the infected when they came. And they did come. Wave after wave of them, drawn by the sounds and smells of the living. We fought them off as best we could, but each attack left us with fewer defenders, and inevitably new infections within our ranks. Hard decisions had to be made. Mercy killings became routine. Friends turned on friends. The compound fractured into smaller groups, each with their own idea of how to survive. I left with a small contingent bound for the hill country. We had 3 vehicles, enough fuel for 100 miles, and a diverse array of weapons scavenged from homes and police stations. We made it as far as the outskirts of the city before military checkpoints stopped us. They weren't letting anyone out. Houston had been designated a quarantine zone, and the order was to shoot anyone attempting to leave. We retreated, looking for another route. Back roads, perhaps, or cross-country if necessary, but each path led to the same result: military blockades or swarms of infected. We were trapped in a city that was rapidly becoming a graveyard. Our group dwindled as we lost people to the infected, to military patrols, to despair. Food became scarce, clean water even more so. We moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to attract attention, human or otherwise. 2 weeks after the outbreak, I found myself alone again. Our last safe house had been overrun during the night. I'd escaped through a second-story window while the others... I try not to think about what happened to them. I made my way to the Houston Chronicle building downtown, hoping to find communications equipment that might still work. The city's power grid was failing, cell networks were down, but some buildings had backup generators and satellite links. The Chronicle building was partially burned but still standing. I entered cautiously, weapon ready. The lobby was clear of infected, but showed signs of a desperate battle. Bullet holes in the walls, dried blood on the floor, makeshift barricades that had ultimately failed. I made my way up to the newsroom on the 3rd floor. It was eerily quiet. The rows of desks abandoned in what looked like a panicked evacuation. Computer screens still glowed, powered by the building's emergency generator. Some showed half-written stories about the outbreak. Others displayed security camera feeds from around the building. I checked the feeds first, making sure I was alone. The cameras showed empty corridors and stairwells. Good. One of the computers was connected to a satellite uplink, likely used by the paper's foreign correspondents. If I could get it working, I might be able to reach the outside world, tell them what was really happening in Houston. As I sat down at the workstation, movement on one of the security feeds caught my eye. A group of people was entering the lobby, but they weren't infected. They moved with purpose, checking corners, weapons raised. Military, but not regular army. Their tactical gear was unmarked, and they moved with the precision of special forces. They were sweeping the building, floor by floor, looking for something, or someone. I had minutes at most before they reached the newsroom. I turned to the satellite terminal and began typing rapidly, composing a message to be broadcast to multiple international news agencies. I attached files I'd downloaded from Harmon's computer, the ones I'd managed to copy to a USB drive before fleeing his house. The message was simple, the truth. About Project Chimera, about the deliberate release on Rig 14, about the military's failed containment and subsequent cover-up, about how to identify and neutralize the infected. Everything I knew, laid bare for the world to see. I hit send just as I heard the stairwell door open. Heavy boots on tiled floor, tactical commands issued in hushed tones. I had nowhere to run. No place to hide in the open-plan newsroom. I raised my hands and turned to face them. 4 operators entered, weapons trained on me. Behind them came a familiar face. Colonel Danfield, looking remarkably healthy for a man I'd shot in the chest less than 2 weeks ago. Body armor, most likely. "Caleb Horton," he said, voice flat. "You've led us on quite a chase." "Sorry to disappoint you," I said, "but you're too late. I just sent everything. Project Chimera, the rig, your containment failures. It's all out there now." Danfield seemed unconcerned. "To whom?" "The international press. They've been compromised for days. Our allies are cooperating fully in managing the narrative." "The narrative?" I almost laughed. "Half the city is dead or walking dead. You can't manage that away." "You'd be surprised what people will believe when the alternative is too terrible to contemplate," Danfield replied. "In a month, Houston will be remembered as a tragic industrial disaster. In a year, it will be a footnote in history. And the infection. It's spreading beyond your cordon. You know that." For the first time, Danfield looked troubled. "Yes, the rate of mutation was unexpected. The current strain is more virulent than our models predicted, but that's why we need you, Mr. Horton." "Me? You've been exposed multiple times yet remain uninfected. Your blood may hold the key to a vaccine, or at least a more effective containment protocol." So that was it. They didn't want to silence me, they wanted to study me. I was a lab rat, just like my crewmates had been. "And if I refuse?" Danfield smiled thinly. "This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Horton. You're coming with us, willing or not." One of the operators approached with zip ties to secure my hands. I considered resisting, but knew it would be pointless against 4 armed men. As they led me from the newsroom, I asked, "What about the people still alive in Houston? Are you just leaving them to die?" "Phase 2 of the containment protocol is already in progress," Danfield said cryptically. "What's Phase 2? He didn't answer, but I would learn soon enough. They took me to a military installation on the outskirts of the city, a temporary base set up in what had once been a high school. The campus was surrounded by concrete barriers, razor wire, and guard towers. Helicopters came and went continuously, ferrying personnel and supplies. I was processed like a prisoner, photographed, fingerprinted, subjected to a battery of medical tests. Blood was drawn, skin samples taken, brain activity monitored. No one would tell me what they were looking for or what they'd found. I was kept in isolation, allowed no contact with other detainees, if there were any. My only human interaction was with the medical staff who came to perform tests, and the guards who brought food and escorted me to and from my cell. Days passed. Maybe weeks. It was hard to keep track in a room with no windows. I tried questioning my captors but received no answers. Then, one day, Colonel Danfield himself came to see me. "Your cooperation has been noted and appreciated, Mr. Horton," he said, standing on the other side of my cell door. "Not like I had much choice," I replied. "True, but now I'm offering you one." He slid a folder through the small opening in the door. "We've completed our analysis of your immune response. You carry a natural genetic resistance to the Chimera pathogen, not immunity. You can still be infected, but your body fights it more effectively than most. With the right supplemental treatments, you could survive infection indefinitely." I leafed through the folder. Most of the medical terminology was beyond me, but the conclusion was clear enough. I was special somehow. "So what's the choice you're offering?" "Join Project Redemption," Danfield said. "A select team of similarly resistant individuals who will help us gather critical data from inside infected zones. In return, you get the treatments you need to stay alive even if exposed, plus eventual relocation to a secure facility once your service is complete." "And if I refuse?" Danfield's expression hardened. "Then you remain here. Without the treatments, your natural resistance will only protect you for so long. Eventually you'll be deployed anyway, but without the benefits. Some choice. What exactly would I be doing in these infected zones? Reconnaissance, sample collection, identifying mutation patterns in the infected population. The virus is evolving rapidly, and we need to stay ahead of it." "You make it sound like you're trying to cure this thing. But that's not it, is it? You're still looking for ways to weaponize it." Danfield didn't bother denying it. "The Chimera project has multiple applications. Defense is one of them. But right now, containment is our priority." "Containment of Houston? It's too late for that." "Houston is already contained," Danfield said with chilling finality. "Phase 2 was completed 3 days ago." A cold dread settled in my stomach. What was Phase 2? Thermal sterilization. The infected zone has been neutralized. It took a moment for his meaning to register. "You bombed the city," I said, feeling sick. "How many people were still alive in there?" "An acceptable number given the alternative," Danfield replied without emotion. The infection had reached critical mass. Houston was already lost, millions of people gone, just like that. "You're a monster," I whispered. "I'm a pragmatist, Mr. Horton. And now you need to be one too. The infection has appeared in 3 other locations along the Gulf Coast. If we don't contain it quickly, we'll be looking at a nationwide epidemic. Your skills and your genetic advantage could help prevent that. Put that way, did I really have a choice? Whatever Danfield and his superiors had done, whatever they were still doing, the immediate threat was real. The infection was spreading. "If I do this," I said carefully, "I want guarantees. Written assurances that I'll be released after a set period of service. And I want regular communication privileges, proof of life messages to be published where the public can see them. The first is negotiable, the second is impossible. All communication regarding Chimera is classified at the highest level. Then no deal." Danfield considered me for a long moment. "I could simply order the treatments withheld. See how cooperative you become when your natural resistance begins to fail." "You could," I agreed. But then you'd just have another infected test subject, not an active field operator. I'm more valuable to you, cooperative. It was a gamble, but I was betting Danfield was indeed a pragmatist. He'd do what gave him the best results, regardless of personal feelings. 2 years of service, he said finally. After that, relocation to a secure facility of our choosing. No communication with the outside world during your service period. Afterwards, limited communication under strict review protocols. That's my final offer. It wasn't much, but it was better than rotting in this cell until they decided I was expendable. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find an opportunity to expose what they'd done, to make them pay for Houston. I'll need the terms in writing, I said, signed by whoever's actually in charge of this operation, not just you. Danfield smiled thinly. I'll see what I can arrange. In the meantime, your first treatment begins tomorrow. I suggest you rest. The side effects can be significant. He left me alone with the folder of medical reports and my thoughts. I had made a deal with the devil, but what choice did I have? The world as I knew it was ending. All I could do was try to survive long enough to tell the truth. The treatments began the next day, as promised. They were as unpleasant as Danfield had implied, hours hooked to IV drips of medications that made my veins burn and my head pound. Nausea, fever, hallucinations. The medical staff said these were expected reactions, that my body was building enhanced resistance to the chimera pathogen. After a week of treatments, they moved me to a different facility, a converted warehouse on what had once been the outskirts of Houston. Now it stood on the edge of a wasteland. From the small high window in my new quarters, I could see the ruins of the city in the distance, not rubble from conventional bombing, but a landscape of melted, fused buildings. They had used something else. Something that generated extreme heat without explosive force. The entire infected zone had been sterilized, just as Danfield had said. My training began immediately. Combat techniques, sample collection protocols, equipment operation. I wasn't alone anymore. There were 8 others like me, people with natural resistance who had been recruited into Project Redemption. Some had been found in military screening programs. Others had been captured after surviving exposure in the field. Like me, they had all chosen service over imprisonment or death. We didn't talk much about our pasts or how we'd ended up here. It was easier that way. We focused on the training, on staying alive. 3 weeks later, we were deployed on our first mission, reconnaissance in a small town outside Corpus Christi where infected had been reported. Our job was to assess the spread, collect tissue samples from the infected, and identify any mutation patterns. The town was a nightmare. The infection had taken hold quickly, converting most of the population within days. The few survivors had barricaded themselves in a church, running low on food and ammunition. We weren't authorized to evacuate them. Our orders were surveillance and sample collection only. I couldn't leave them to die. Neither could 2 others on my team, Lisa, a former ER nurse, and Miguel, who'd been a police officer. The remaining team members were either too frightened or too indoctrinated to disobey orders. They continued the mission while we 3 broke protocol to get the survivors out. There were 11 of them, mostly elderly people and a few children with a single adult guardian. They had been surviving on canned food and rainwater, shooting the infected that got too close to their makeshift fortress. We led them through back streets and alleyways, avoiding concentrations of infected. Our enhanced resistance gave us an advantage. Even if bitten, we wouldn't turn, at least not right away. The treatments had seen to that. But the survivors had no such protection. We got them to our extraction point just as the rest of our team was finishing the primary mission. The argument was brief but intense. Taking unauthorized personnel back to base was against every protocol, but leaving civilians to die violated something more fundamental, basic humanity. In the end, we convinced the team leader by pointing out that the survivors were valuable data points, uninfected individuals from a heavily infected zone. Their blood work alone would be scientifically significant. It was a cold, calculating argument, but it worked. The survivors were taken to a quarantine facility for observation and testing. I never found out what happened to them after that. We weren't allowed to follow up, and asking too many questions was discouraged. Over the next 6 months, our team conducted similar missions in infected zones across the Gulf Coast. Each time, we gathered data, collected samples, and reported back on the spread of the infection. And each time, when we found survivors, we did what we could to help them, justifying it to our handlers as additional data collection. The pattern of the outbreak was becoming clear. The infection spread rapidly in densely populated areas, but could be contained in rural regions where population density was lower. Military cordons had succeeded in isolating several major outbreak zones, but new clusters kept appearing, suggesting that either the containment wasn't perfect or the infection had additional vectors we hadn't identified. During a mission in rural Louisiana, we discovered something disturbing: infected animals. Previously, the pathogen had only affected humans, but now we found infected dogs, cats, and even wild animals like raccoons and deer. The virus was jumping species, adapting to new hosts. This development alarmed even our handlers. If the pathogen could infect wildlife, containment became virtually impossible. The infection could spread across the country through animal vectors alone, regardless of human quarantine measures. Our mission parameters changed. We were now tasked with capturing infected animals for study, in addition to our human pathogen surveillance. The work became more dangerous as we dealt with infected predators that retained their natural hunting instincts, combined with the mindless aggression of the chimera pathogen. During one such mission, we lost 2 team members to an infected mountain lion that attacked our camp at night. Despite our enhanced resistance, massive trauma could still kill us. The lion tore through Miguel's throat before we could put it down, and Lisa died of blood loss after having her femoral artery severed. Their deaths hit me hard. They had been good people, trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation. The remaining team members and I held a small memorial service, burning their bodies to prevent possible contamination. Our handlers approved this deviation from protocol. Apparently, even they had some remnant of humanity left. As the 1-year mark of my service approached, I began to notice changes in my own body. The treatments that gave us enhanced resistance had side effects beyond the initial reactions. My hair was falling out in clumps. My gums bled constantly. I had frequent nosebleeds and bruised easily. The medical staff said these were expected developments and adjusted my treatment regimen accordingly. But I knew the truth. The chemicals they were pumping into us were killing us slowly. I brought this up with the others on the team. They'd noticed similar symptoms, but had been afraid to mention them. Together, we confronted our handler, a cold-eyed woman who had replaced Danfield after he was transferred to another project. "The treatments are temporary measures," she admitted when pressed. "They weren't designed for long-term use. We're working on more sustainable protocols, but for now, this is what we have." "And when the treatments stop working entirely?" I asked. "Then you'll be reassigned to non-field positions," she said, not meeting our eyes. We all knew what that meant. Once we lost our usefulness as field operatives, we'd become lab subjects. Our bodies opened up and examined to see what the treatments and the virus had done to us. That night, the 4 remaining members of our team made a pact. We would complete one final mission, then attempt to escape. We had learned enough about the security protocols and shift rotations to identify vulnerabilities. We had also managed to stockpile small amounts of our treatment medications. Not enough for long-term survival, but enough to give us a fighting chance if we could reach one of the rumored safe zones in the mountains. Our final official mission took us to the outskirts of what had once been Atlanta. The city had fallen to the infection 3 months earlier and, like Houston, had been thermally sterilized. Our task was to collect samples from the boundary area, looking for any signs of pathogen survival in the scorched zone. The mission went according to plan. We collected our samples, documented our findings, and prepared for extraction. But instead of returning to the designated pickup point, we split up, each taking a different route to confuse pursuit. We would rendezvous at a predetermined location 2 days later. I never made it to the rendezvous. My escape route took me through a small town that had been abandoned during the early stages of the Atlanta outbreak. I was moving carefully, avoiding the main streets, when I encountered something unexpected. A military patrol, but not regular troops. These were like the Special Forces team that had captured me in Houston, unmarked tactical gear and precision movements. They weren't looking for me specifically, they didn't know about our escape plan yet, but they were sweeping the area, and I was in their path. I tried to circle around them, but one of them spotted me. I ran, using my knowledge of infected zone navigation to my advantage, ducking through buildings and using debris as cover. I thought I'd lost them when I reached the edge of town, but as I crossed an open field toward the tree line, a shot rang out. Pain exploded in my leg as a bullet tore through my thigh, sending me crashing to the ground. They were on me before I could crawl to cover. 4 operators, weapons trained on my head. One of them spoke into a radio, confirming my capture. Then he addressed me directly. "Horton, right, from Redemption Team 3. You're way off course, soldier." I didn't bother with denials or excuses. It was obvious I had gone AWOL. They patched up my leg, they needed me alive, and transported me to a mobile command post nearby. There, to my surprise, I found Colonel Danfield waiting. "Mr. Horton," he said, looking older and more tired than when I'd last seen him. "I'm disappointed. You were doing so well." "The treatments are killing us," I said simply. "Yes," he acknowledged. "Unfortunately, that's the trade-off for enhanced resistance. We've been working on improvements, but progress has been limited." "And the others on my team?" "Already recaptured or dead," Danfield said. "You were the last." I felt a surge of grief for my teammates, but I pushed it down. Showing weakness wouldn't help me now. "So what happens to me?" I asked. "Back to being a lab rat?" Danfield studied me for a long moment. "Actually, no. You've proven yourself too valuable for that. Despite your attempt to escape, your field performance has been exemplary. We have a new assignment for you." "I'm not interested in another suicide mission," I said. "This isn't a field operation," Danfield replied. "It's a research position. We've established a new facility in Colorado, isolated, well-protected, focusing on developing a more effective response to the pathogen. Your unique physiology and field experience would be invaluable to the research team." I didn't trust him, but what choice did I have? I was recaptured, wounded, and my teammates were gone. My options had narrowed to cooperation or execution. "What's the catch?" I asked. "No catch. Just continued service to your country in a different capacity." "The work is important, Horton. The infection has spread further than we ever anticipated. Over 30% of the continental United States is now compromised. We need solutions, not more problems." 30%. The number hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been focused on my own survival and localized missions, the infection had been spreading unchecked across the country. How many cities had been sterilized like Houston and Atlanta? How many millions dead? "If I agree," I said carefully, "I want access to the research data. All of it. Not just what you decide to show me." Danfield considered this. "That can be arranged within reasonable security parameters. Your insight could be valuable if you're fully informed. It wasn't much, but it was something. A chance to learn more about what was really happening, perhaps even to find a way to stop it, or at least to document the truth for whatever remained of human civilization after this was over." "Fine," I said. "I'll work with your research team. But no more field operations, and no more experimental treatments without full disclosure of the risks." "Agreed," Danfield said, extending his hand. I ignored it, and after an awkward moment, he withdrew it. "You'll be transported to the Colorado facility once your wound has healed enough for travel. In the meantime, consider this an opportunity to reflect on your situation, Mr. Horton. The world is changing. Those who adapt will survive. Those who cling to the past will not." I had nothing to say to that. The past was already gone, burned away in the fires that had consumed Houston, Atlanta, and who knew how many other cities. The future was a dark uncertainty filled with infected hordes, military containment zones, and the slow collapse of everything I had once known. But I was still alive, still fighting, and as long as that remained true, I would keep looking for a way to expose the truth and perhaps find some measure of justice for the millions who had died because of Project Chimera. My leg healed slowly, the wound complicated by the side effects of my treatment regimen. It was 3 weeks before I was deemed fit for transport to the Colorado facility. During that time, I was kept under heavy guard in a medical unit at the mobile command post. News was limited, but I gathered bits and pieces from overheard conversations among the medical staff and guards. The situation nationwide was deteriorating rapidly. The infection had reached the West Coast. Major population centers throughout the Midwest had been quarantined or sanitized. The government had relocated to a secure facility in Wyoming, abandoning Washington, D.C. after an outbreak in the Pentagon itself. The world was ending, not with a bang but with a moan, the collective sound of millions of infected searching endlessly for their next victim. When the time came for my transfer, I was loaded onto a military transport helicopter, along with several crates of medical equipment and research materials. The flight was long, requiring multiple refueling stops at military outposts along the way. At each stop, I caught glimpses of a changed world, makeshift fortifications, refugee camps, burn pits for the infected. We arrived at the Colorado facility near nightfall. It was built into the side of a mountain, more bunker than laboratory, with multiple security checkpoints and armed guards everywhere. The entrance was a massive steel door set into the rock face, large enough to admit vehicles and heavy equipment. Inside, the facility was a maze of corridors and rooms, all clinically white and brightly lit. Personnel wore color-coded uniforms indicating their roles: white for medical staff, blue for security, gray for support personnel, green for research. I was processed, issued a yellow uniform, presumably for test subjects or special consultants, and assigned quarters that were more comfortable than any I'd had since this ordeal began. A real bed, private bathroom, even a small desk with some books. Still a cell, but a gilded one. The next morning, I was introduced to the research team. They were an eclectic group: virologists, geneticists, neurologists, even a few military scientists with specialties I couldn't identify. They treated me with professional courtesy, if not warmth, clearly viewing me as a valuable research subject rather than a colleague. The lead scientist, Dr. Eleanor Chen, explained my role. Your natural resistance combined with your exposure to various strains of the pathogen makes your physiological responses extremely valuable to our work. We'll be conducting regular testing, blood draws, tissue samples, cognitive assessments to monitor how your body is responding to both the infection and the treatments. Danfield mentioned I would have access to the research data, I said. Dr. Chen nodded. Yes, Colonel Danfield informed us of that arrangement. You'll have limited access to our findings through a secure terminal in your quarters. Some information remains classified, of course, but you'll see enough to understand the progress we're making. And what progress is that, exactly? I asked. We've identified 3 distinct strains of the pathogen, each with its own transmission characteristics and symptoms. The original strain, what we're calling alpha, is the one you encountered on the oil rig. It spreads through direct fluid contact, primarily bites, and causes rapid neurological degradation, followed by death and reanimation within hours. "I'm familiar with the effects," I said dryly. Dr. Chen continued, unfazed by my tone. "The beta strain emerged in Houston about a week after the initial outbreak. It's airborne, though not highly contagious, requiring prolonged exposure in enclosed spaces. It has a longer incubation period, up to 3 days, but otherwise presents similarly to alpha. And the third strain. Gamma is the most concerning. It appeared approximately 4 months ago in wildlife populations. It can infect multiple species and appears to preserve more higher brain functions in the infected. They retain basic problem-solving abilities and some semblance of coordination. They can use simple tools, operate doorknobs, even set basic traps." That was horrifying news. The shambling, mindless infected were dangerous enough in large numbers. Infected with even rudimentary intelligence would be a nightmare. "How widespread is the Gamma strain?" I asked. "Limited at present, primarily in the Pacific Northwest. But it's spreading. Our models suggest it will become the dominant strain within 6 to 8 months, unless we develop an effective containment strategy." "Or a cure," I suggested. Dr. Chen's expression tightened slightly. "A cure for those already infected appears highly unlikely. The neurological damage is extensive and irreversible. Our focus is on developing a vaccine for the uninfected and improving the resistance treatments for essential personnel. Essential personnel, like me and my team, expendable assets given just enough protection to be useful until we weren't." "And how's that going?" I asked. "The improved treatments?" "We've made incremental progress. The latest formulation reduces the most severe side effects by approximately 20%, while maintaining the same level of resistance. You'll be transitioned to this new protocol starting tomorrow. 20% reduction in side effects that were already killing us slowly. Not exactly a breakthrough." Over the next few weeks, I settled into a routine at the facility. Mornings were devoted to medical testing and examinations. Afternoons, I was free to review research data on my terminal or use the small recreation area available to yellow uniforms. Evenings brought more tests, followed by a meal and lockdown in my quarters. The research data was illuminating, if heavily redacted. The infection had spread far more widely than Danfield had admitted. Nearly 60% of the US population was either infected, dead, or in quarantine zones. The remaining secure areas were under martial law, with resources dwindling and civil unrest growing. International borders had been closed early in the crisis, but not before the infection had reached Canada, Mexico, and via air travel, parts of Europe and Asia. The global situation was unclear, communications were limited, and many countries had gone dark entirely. The Colorado facility was one of 12 similar installations around the country, each working on different aspects of the crisis. Ours was focused on pathogen analysis and treatment development. Others were working on vaccine research, containment technologies, and something called ecological reset protocols that wasn't explained further. As the weeks passed, I began to notice subtle changes in the facility's operations. Security was tightened, research priorities shifted, staff worked longer hours, often sleeping in their labs rather than returning to their quarters. Something had happened or was happening, but no one would tell me what. I got my answer during a routine medical examination. Dr. Chen was drawing blood samples when an alarm sounded, 3 short bursts followed by a long tone. Her face went pale. "What is it?" I asked. "Perimeter breach," she said, quickly finishing the blood draw and sealing the sample. "Level 3. What does that mean? It means we have a containment situation at the outer security ring. Nothing to worry about yet, but her expression belied her reassuring words. The facility went into lockdown. Yellow uniforms like me were confined to quarters. Through my small window into the corridor, I could see security personnel running past, heavily armed and wearing tactical gear. This was more than a routine security drill. Hours passed with no information. The usual meal delivery didn't come. The terminal in my quarters showed only a standby screen, access to the research database revoked. It was well past midnight when my door suddenly opened. A security officer I didn't recognize stood there looking tense. "Horton, grab your essentials. You're being relocated." "What's happening?" I asked, already moving to collect the few personal items I had. "Facility compromise? Gamma strain infected have breached the outer perimeter. Dr. Chen ordered all research assets evacuated to Site Omega. Research assets, not people. Assets." I followed the officer through corridors I'd never seen before, down multiple levels via emergency stairwells rather than elevators. We passed groups of personnel in various states of controlled panic, scientists clutching research materials, security teams establishing fallback positions, support staff loading equipment onto carts. "How bad is it?" I asked as we hurried along. "Bad," the officer replied grimly. "They came in organized groups, targeted the weak points in our perimeter. They're using weapons, nothing sophisticated, just clubs and spears, but they're coordinating their attacks. We've never seen this level of organization from the infected. The Gamma strain," I said. "Dr. Chen mentioned they retain some higher functions." "Yeah, well, she understated the case. These aren't mindless shamblers. They hunt." We reached a lower-level garage where several military vehicles were being loaded. Dr. Chen was there, directing the evacuation of critical research materials. She spotted me and waved us over. "Mr. Horton, good. You'll be in Transport 3 with the biological samples. We're leaving in 5 minutes." "Where are we going?" I asked. "Site Omega, our fallback facility. It's about 200 miles north of here, deeper in the mountains, more isolated, more secure." "And the people left behind?" Dr. Chen's expression hardened. "Security forces will cover our withdrawal, then implement Protocol Sundown if the facility is fully compromised." "Meaning?" "Meaning they'll destroy the facility rather than let it fall into the hands of the infected. Standard procedure. Sacrifice the many to save the few deemed essential. I'd seen it in Houston, in Atlanta, in countless small towns across the infected zones. Now I was seeing it here, in what was supposed to be one of the last bastions of hope. I was loaded into a transport vehicle, along with several cases of biological samples and 2 nervous lab technicians who avoided eye contact with me. Through the vehicle's small windows, I could see security forces establishing defensive positions around the garage exit. They looked scared, but determined. They knew they were being left behind. Our convoy of 5 vehicles departed through a tunnel that led away from the main entrance, emerging about a mile from the facility on a narrow mountain road. From this vantage point, I could see the scale of the attack. Hundreds of infected swarmed around the main entrance, with more emerging from the surrounding forest. They moved with purpose, not the random shambling I was accustomed to seeing. Some carried crude weapons. Others used large tree branches as battering rams against the outer doors. We didn't linger to watch the outcome. The convoy picked up speed, winding through mountain passes and eventually joining a remote highway heading north. The journey was tense, with frequent stops to check for signs of pursuit or ambush. The Gamma infected weren't just stronger and smarter. They were hunters, trackers. They could follow us if they caught our scent. It took nearly 6 hours to reach Site Omega. Unlike the previous facility, this one was completely underground. Its entrance a nondescript metal door set into a cliff face, barely visible until we were right on top of it. The door slid open as our convoy approached, revealing a sloping tunnel large enough for vehicles. Inside, Site Omega was smaller but more advanced than the previous facility. The layout was more compact, the security measures more extensive. My new quarters were barely larger than a closet, with no window even into a corridor. The only luxury was a small tablet computer mounted to the wall, providing limited access to entertainment content but no research data or outside communication. I spent 3 days in isolation, with meals delivered by automated systems rather than human staff. On the 4th day, Dr. Chen came to see me. "You've been reassigned," she said without preamble. "To what?" "Field operations. Your resistance profile is too valuable to waste on laboratory observation. We need intelligence on the gamma strain in its natural environment. You want to send me out there?" "After what happened at the last facility?" "Precisely because of what happened," she said, "we need to understand how they're organizing, how they're communicating. The gamma strain is evolving faster than our models predicted. If we don't develop effective countermeasures soon, there won't be any safe zones left." "I was promised no more field operations," I reminded her. "Circumstances have changed, Mr. Horton. We're fighting for the survival of our species now. Old agreements mean nothing." She was right, of course. The world I'd known, the rules I'd lived by, the promises made to me, all of it was dust now. There was only survival, moment to moment, day to day. "When do I leave?" I asked. "Tomorrow. You'll be given specialized equipment for data collection and a new treatment regimen designed specifically for gamma exposure. The mission parameters are observation only, no engagement with the infected unless absolutely necessary. We need information more than we need heroics." I nodded. What else could I do? Refuse and be thrown in a cell until they decided to use me as a lab rat again? At least in the field, I might have a chance to escape, to make my own choices. The next morning, I was equipped and briefed. My mission was to infiltrate a gamma-infected zone in what had once been Boulder, Colorado, observe their behavior patterns, and collect biological samples if possible. I would be inserted by helicopter at dawn and extracted 3 days later, assuming I survived. The equipment was top-notch, lightweight body armor, advanced night vision, a specialized sampling kit, and weapons that included both conventional firearms and something new. Sonic disruptors designed to confuse and disorient the infected without alerting others in the area. The new treatment regimen came in the form of an auto-injector that I would use daily to maintain my resistance. Dr. Chen warned me that the side effects would be more pronounced with this formula. The price of enhanced protection, she called it. As dawn approached, I was led to a helipad on the surface above Site Omega. A sleek, black helicopter waited, its rotors already turning. The pilot wore a sealed flight suit with its own oxygen supply, protection against airborne strains of the infection. Dr. Chen gave me a final briefing beside the helicopter. "Remember, observation is your priority. We need to understand how they're coordinating, what hierarchical structures might exist, how they're selecting and training their—" I hesitate to call them leaders, but that appears to be what's emerging. "And if I encounter conventional infected, alpha or beta strains, avoid them if possible. They're less intelligent, but still dangerous in numbers. The gamma strain seems to use them sometimes, driving them toward targets like weapons. That was a disturbing thought. The smarter infected using their mindless counterparts as cannon fodder. Evolution in action, I supposed, brutal and efficient." "One last thing," Dr. Chen said, reaching into her pocket. She handed me a small metal cylinder about the size of my thumb. "Emergency protocol. If you're cornered, compromised, with no way out, twist the cap and press the button. It's quick, painless, better than the alternative, a suicide pill, the ultimate extraction plan." I pocketed it without comment and boarded the helicopter. As we lifted off, I looked down at Site Omega receding below us. From the air, it was nearly invisible, just another rocky outcropping in the vast mountain range. A fitting metaphor for humanity itself now, small, hidden, clinging to existence in a world that had moved on. The flight to Boulder took less than an hour. The pilot set me down in a clearing about 5 miles from the city center, away from known infected concentrations. No words were exchanged, just a thumbs up from the pilot before the helicopter lifted off again. Leaving me alone in the wilderness, I oriented myself using the GPS unit provided and began the hike toward Boulder. The morning was clear and cool, the mountain air crisp in my lungs. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. As I approached the outskirts of what had once been a vibrant college town, signs of the infection became increasingly evident. Abandoned vehicles lined the roads, many with doors left open in haste. Houses stood empty, some with boarding or barricades that had ultimately failed. The occasional dark bloodstain on pavement or walls told its own story. I moved carefully, using cover and concealment techniques I'd learned during my time with Redemption Team. The suburban neighborhoods gradually gave way to more commercial areas, and then the university campus itself, once the heart of Boulder, now an eerie, empty husk. It was on the campus that I first spotted them, a group of infected, about 20 strong, moving in formation through the main quadrangle. They weren't shambling or wandering aimlessly as Alpha-infected would. They marched, almost, maintaining spacing and what appeared to be designated positions. I observed them through binoculars from the concealment of an administrative building. Their physical appearance was different from the Alpha and Beta infected I was familiar with. The skin discoloration was less pronounced, more mottled than uniform. Their eyes retained more clarity, though still with the telltale clouded look of the infected. Most striking was their behavior. They communicated with each other through a series of grunts, gestures, and what might have been rudimentary words. One infected in particular seemed to be directing the others. He was larger, his clothes less tattered, and he carried a makeshift spear with what looked like a knife blade attached to the end. The others responded to his grunts and gestures immediately, adjusting their formation or direction as commanded. I documented everything with the recording equipment I'd been given, making verbal notes to accompany the video. This was beyond what Dr. Chen had described. This wasn't just retained higher brain function. This was the emergence of a new social structure. I followed the group at a safe distance as they moved through the campus, eventually reaching what had once been the university's main administrative building. Outside, more infected gathered, at least 100 of them, arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern, concentric circles around the building's entrance. The leader of the group I'd been following approached the center of this gathering. There, standing on the steps of the building, was another infected who stood out from the rest. This one wore what appeared to be deliberate adornment, pieces of colored cloth tied around arms and neck, and a headdress made from what looked like animal antlers, a primal form of authority signaling. The two leaders engaged in what I could only describe as a conversation, a series of grunts, clicks, and hand gestures that clearly conveyed specific meaning. The gathered infected watched silently, perfectly still in their circular formation. After this exchange, the adorned leader raised his arms, and a sound rose from the gathered infected, not quite speech, not quite animal noise, but something in between, a chant, rhythmic and coordinated. It continued for several minutes before abruptly stopping at another gesture from the leader. What followed was even more disturbing. Small groups of infected were brought forward. These appeared to be freshly turned, still showing the more erratic behavior of Alpha or Beta strains. The adorned leader approached each group in turn, made a series of sounds and gestures, and then observed their responses. Those that responded appropriately were integrated into the larger group. Those that didn't were dragged away by other infected, their fate unknown but easy to guess. They were selecting for intelligence, for adaptability, for those who could be controlled and trained. I documented everything, making sure to capture clear imagery of the leaders and the selection process. This was evolution happening in real time, not over millions of years, but over months. The virus wasn't just spreading, it was adapting, creating a new form of social organization from the ruins of human civilization. As night fell, I retreated to a secure location I'd identified earlier. The upper floor of a building about half a mile from the campus, with good visibility and multiple escape routes. I administered my daily treatment from the auto-injector, grimacing at the burning sensation that spread through my veins. Dr. Chen hadn't exaggerated about the side effects. Within minutes, I was experiencing severe nausea and vision disturbances that took nearly an hour to subside. Once recovered, I reviewed the day's observations and prepared my plan for the next day. The adorned leader was clearly a figure of significance. Learning more about him and the central administrative building that appeared to be their headquarters became my priority. I spent the next day observing the building from various vantage points. The infected maintained a constant presence around it, with organized patrols extending outward in a roughly mile-wide perimeter. They had sentries posted at key intersections and what appeared to be hunting parties departing and returning at regular intervals. The hunting parties were the most concerning. They moved with clear purpose and strategy, using flanking maneuvers and ambush tactics. They brought back both food, deer and other wildlife, and new infected, presumably captured humans who had been bitten and turned. These new additions went through the same selection process I'd witnessed the day before. On the third day, I took a calculated risk. I needed biological samples, and to get those, I needed to get closer. I identified a pattern in the patrol routes and used it to approach the administrative building from a maintenance tunnel that connected several campus structures. The tunnel was dark and disused, but thankfully clear of infected. It brought me to a utility room in the basement of the target building. From there, I carefully made my way upward, avoiding the more populated areas based on the sounds I could hear echoing through the structure. On the third floor, I found what appeared to be a nerve center of sorts. Maps were spread across tables, actual paper maps of the region, marked with symbols I didn't recognize but which clearly indicated locations of interest. Some areas were crossed out. Others were circled or had arrows drawn toward them. They were planning something, expansion maybe, or migration. In an adjacent room, I found something even more disturbing. Infected were working at tables, using simple tools to modify weapons, attaching blades to poles, sharpening pieces of metal, even attempting to repair what looked like a damaged firearm. Their movements were clumsy, but purposeful. They were learning, adapting, creating. I collected my samples as quietly as possible. Swabs from surfaces, small tissue samples from materials the infected had handled, even an air sample to check for spores or other airborne transmission vectors. Each sample was carefully sealed and labeled according to protocol. I was preparing to retreat the way I'd come when I heard a commotion from below. Grunts and calls that seemed to indicate alarm or excitement. Had I been discovered? I couldn't risk finding out. I needed to find another exit. The building's floor plan, typical of university administrative structures, included fire escapes at each end. I made my way toward the nearest one, moving as quietly as possible. I was almost there when I encountered an infected coming the other way. It was a female, dressed in the tattered remains of what might have been university staff clothing. She froze when she saw me, her clouded eyes widening in what appeared to be surprise. For a moment, we both stood perfectly still, assessing each other. Then she opened her mouth and let out a sound, not the mindless moan of an alpha infected, but a deliberate piercing alarm call. I had no choice. I used the sonic disruptor, aiming it directly at her. The high-frequency pulse made her stumble and clutch at her head, disoriented but not incapacitated. I didn't wait to see if others would respond to her call. I ran for the fire escape, bursting through the door and clattering down the metal stairs as fast as I could. Below, infected were already emerging from the building, responding to the alarm. They moved with purpose, spreading out to cut off potential escape routes. I reached the ground and sprinted away from the building, heading for the cover of nearby structures. Calls and grunts behind me indicated pursuit. They were organizing, communicating my position to each other, attempting to flank me. I ran hard, using every evasion tactic I'd learned in my time with Redemption Team, doubling back, creating false trails, using terrain features to break line of sight. The infected were persistent, but not as fast as an uninfected human at a full sprint. I gradually opened the distance between us. By nightfall, I had reached the extraction point, a clearing similar to the one where I'd been dropped off. The infected were still searching for me, but I'd managed to lose them in the complex urban terrain of the abandoned city. The helicopter was late. I waited in concealment at the edge of the clearing, watching for any sign of the infected catching up to me. Hours passed. The appointed extraction time came and went. Had something happened at Site Omega? Had the facility been compromised like the previous one? As dawn approached, I had to make a decision. Stay and hope the helicopter would eventually come, or start moving towards Site Omega on foot, a journey of over 200 miles through infected territory. The decision was made for me when I spotted movement at the far edge of the clearing. Infected, at least a dozen of them, moving in a search pattern. Among them was the adorned leader I'd observed earlier. He was leading the hunt personally. I couldn't stay. I retreated silently into the forest, moving perpendicular to their search pattern, then circling around to head north once I judged it safe. The journey to Site Omega would be long and dangerous, but I had no choice. The samples I carried were too important to lose, and my own survival instinct was as strong as ever. Days passed as I made my way north, avoiding roads and settlements where possible, moving by night when I could. The treatment regimen continued to take its toll. Each injection left me weaker, sicker, my body rebelling against the chemicals that kept the infection at bay. I encountered infected periodically, mostly alpha-strain stragglers or small groups of beta-infected clustered around abandoned settlements. I avoided them when possible, eliminated them quietly when necessary. The gamma-infected seemed concentrated in Boulder, but I remained vigilant for signs that they were spreading outward. On the 7th day of my journey, I spotted aircraft in the distance, not helicopters, but larger transport planes, flying in formation toward the south. Military aircraft, almost certainly. Something was happening, some larger operation underway, but I had no way of knowing what. It was on the 10th day that I encountered another living human. I was crossing a small valley when I spotted a thin wisp of smoke rising from a cluster of trees. Approaching cautiously, I found a small camp, a lean-to shelter, a carefully managed fire, and a single occupant. He was an older man, bearded and weathered, dressed in practical outdoor clothing that had seen better days. He had a hunting rifle across his knees and was skinning what appeared to be a rabbit. He looked up as I approached, unsurprised and unafraid. "Wondered when someone would spot my smoke," he said casually. "Been here 3 weeks now. You military?" I hesitated, then decided partial truth was safest. "Former oil worker. Been on my own since Houston fell." He nodded, accepting this without question. "Name's Martin. Used to be a park ranger in these parts. Figure I know the land better than those things, so I've managed to stay ahead of them so far." "Caleb," I replied, offering my real name for the first time in months. "You've seen infected in this area?" "Some. Mostly the regular kind, the ones that just shuffle around and moan. But lately there've been others, smarter ones. They hunt in groups, use basic tools. Bad news if they catch you. Gamma strain, I said without thinking. Martin gave me a sharp look. You know about the different types? You sure you're not military? I've been around, I said evasively. Picked up information here and there. The ones you're describing, they're a newer strain, more evolved. Evolved, Martin repeated, shaking his head. That's one way of putting it. I call it a goddamn nightmare. Way I see it, the regular infected will eventually rot away or starve or whatever it is they do. But these new ones, they're adapting, learning. They might be around for the long haul. He wasn't wrong. The Gamma strain represented a new phase in the evolution of the infection. Not just a disease anymore, but something closer to a successor species. You heading somewhere in particular? Martin asked. I considered my answer carefully. I couldn't tell him about Site Omega, but I needed some explanation for my journey north. Heard there might be a secure zone in the mountains, I said. Some kind of government facility still operating. Thought it was worth checking out. Martin nodded again. Heard rumors like that myself. Don't put much stock in them, though. Government hasn't exactly covered itself in glory during this mess. All those containment operations that amounted to burning cities to the ground with people still in them. He spat into the fire. I'll take my chances on my own, thanks. He offered to share his meal, and I accepted gratefully. Fresh meat was a luxury I hadn't experienced in months. As we ate, Martin shared what information he had about the region, areas with heavy infected presence, potential safe routes, locations of abandoned supplies that might still be untouched. What's your plan? He asked as we finished eating. If you find this facility and it turns out to be real, what then? Honestly? I don't know, I admitted. Survive, I guess. Try to find a way to stop this thing from spreading further. Martin laughed humorlessly. Stop it? It's already won, friend. Humans had their run and now it's something else's turn. Circle of life and all that. Best we can do is carve out our little corners and hang on as long as we can. His fatalism was understandable but frustrating. If everyone thought that way, there really was no hope. But I knew from my time with the research teams that there were still people fighting, still looking for solutions, even if their methods were sometimes as monstrous as the infection itself. I spent the night at Martin's camp, taking turns keeping watch. In the morning, I prepared to continue my journey, now armed with his knowledge of the terrain ahead. You could stay, he offered, as I was gathering my gear. 2 survivors are stronger than 1. I know how to live off this land, and you seem handy in a fight. It was tempting. The simple life of a survivor, far from the moral complexities and compromises of the research facilities. No more experimental treatments, no more missions into infected territory. Just day-to-day survival in the wilderness. But the samples I carried were too important. They might contain the key to understanding the Gamma strain's evolution, possibly even developing more effective countermeasures. And despite everything, some part of me still wanted answers. About Project Chimera, about the role of people like Danfield and Harmon, about how humanity had engineered its own downfall. I need to keep moving, I said, but thank you. For the food, the information, and the company. Martin nodded, unsurprised. Each survivor's got to find their own way, I suppose. If you change your mind, I'll be around this area for another week or so before moving on. After that, he shrugged. Who knows? We parted ways, 2 strangers briefly connected by the simple fact of still being alive in a dead world. As I continued northward, I found myself thinking about Martin's perspective. Was he right? Had humanity already lost, leaving nothing but a holding action before inevitable extinction? Or was there still some path forward, some way to reclaim the world from the infected? I didn't have an answer. All I could do was keep moving, one day at a time, carrying my small piece of the puzzle toward people who might be able to use it. The journey became more difficult as I entered higher elevations. The mountain terrain was challenging even for someone in peak condition, which I definitely wasn't. The side effects of the treatments continued to worsen: nausea, dizzy spells, occasional hallucinations. Twice I found myself coughing up blood after particularly strenuous climbs. By my best estimate, I was still at least a week away from Site Omega when my auto-injector ran out of medication. I'd been stretching the doses, using less than the recommended amount to make them last longer, but eventually the reservoir ran dry. Without the treatments, my natural resistance would gradually fade. If exposed to the gamma strain, I would have perhaps 3 to 5 days before infection took hold. The landscape grew increasingly familiar as I approached the general vicinity of Site Omega, but without precise coordinates or communication, finding the hidden entrance would be nearly impossible. I needed to get close enough for their perimeter sensors to detect me, assuming they were still operational. I was navigating a particularly steep slope when the rock beneath my foot gave way. I slid several yards down the rocky incline, tumbling painfully before coming to a stop against a boulder. Pain shot through my left leg, not broken, but badly sprained. I wouldn't be climbing any more mountains for a while. I managed to drag myself to a small overhang that offered some shelter and assessed my situation. I was injured, without medication, lost in the mountains, with no guarantee that Site Omega was still operational or that anyone was looking for me. My options were severely limited. As night fell, I considered using the emergency beacon I'd been given. It would broadcast my location to any receiving station within range, hopefully including Site Omega. But it would also potentially alert any infected in the area to my presence. A calculated risk, but perhaps my only remaining option. I activated the beacon and settled in to wait, conserving my remaining water and the few energy bars I had left. If help didn't come within 48 hours, I would need to find another solution, though what that might be, I had no idea. The first night passed uneventfully. Dawn brought clear skies and warming temperatures, but no sign of rescue. My leg throbbed painfully, the swelling making it difficult to move even short distances. I rationed my supplies carefully, knowing they needed to last. It was mid-afternoon when I heard the sound of an approaching helicopter. Relief flooded through me as I spotted the black shape against the blue sky, circling overhead before moving in my direction. They had received my signal after all. The helicopter touched down about 50 yards from my position on a relatively flat area. Two figures emerged, wearing the familiar tactical gear of Site Omega's security forces. They spotted me and approached cautiously, weapons at the ready. "Horton?" one called out when they were close enough. "Caleb Horton." "That's me," I confirmed, wincing as I tried to stand and failed. They reached me quickly, one kneeling to examine my injured leg, while the other maintained a watchful perimeter. "You're a hard man to find," the first one said, introducing himself as Sergeant Rivera. "We've had search teams looking for you since you missed extraction." "The helicopter never showed," I said. "Had to make my own way." "The extraction team was attacked en route," Rivera explained. "Gamma infected set up an ambush. They're learning our patterns, our protocols. 2 pilots dead, the third severely injured. By the time we could organize another attempt, you were gone." They helped me to the helicopter, Rivera supporting most of my weight as I hobbled across the uneven terrain. Inside, a medic immediately began treating my leg while the pilot prepared for takeoff. "Did you complete the mission?" Rivera asked once we were airborne. "Get the samples." I patted the secure container still strapped to my belt. "All here. Plus observational data they won't believe unless they see it. The gamma strain is more advanced than anyone realizes. They're organizing, communicating, even developing a social hierarchy." Rivera's expression darkened. "Yeah, we're seeing that all over. Boulder, Denver, Fort Collins. They're establishing territories, setting up defensive perimeters. Some are even using firearms now, though not very effectively yet. It's only a matter of time." "Time until what?" Until they figure it out, how to use our weapons, our technologies, how to breach our remaining secure zones, how to finish what the virus started. It was a grim assessment, but I couldn't disagree. What I'd seen in Boulder pointed to exactly that outcome. The infected weren't just surviving, they were adapting, evolving, filling the ecological niche that humans were rapidly vacating. The flight to Site Omega took less than 30 minutes. As we approached, I could see that the facility had been fortified since my departure. New defensive positions had been established on the surrounding ridges, and what appeared to be anti-aircraft batteries were positioned near the main entrance. We landed on a new helipad built into the mountainside, connected to the main facility by a short tunnel. Medical personnel were waiting to transport me inside on a stretcher, despite my protests that I could walk with assistance. I was taken directly to the medical wing, where my leg was properly treated, and the samples I'd collected were immediately whisked away to the research labs. Dr. Chen appeared shortly afterward, looking tired but intensely focused. "Mr. Horton," she said, pulling up a chair beside my bed, "I'm impressed. Few would have survived what you endured these past 2 weeks." "Didn't have much choice," I replied. "What's happening here?" "The new defenses outside, the increased security, something's changed." Dr. Chen hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "You've earned the right to know. The Gamma strain has spread faster than our models predicted. Major population centers across the western states are now under their control. They're developing organizational structures, territorial boundaries, even rudimentary technologies. In effect, they're establishing a new civilization on the ruins of our own." And the military response? Increasingly desperate. Operation Firestorm was initiated last week. Thermonuclear strikes against major gamma strain concentrations. Denver, Phoenix, Portland, Seattle, all gone now. I felt sick. Millions more dead, cities erased. And for what? The infected would simply move elsewhere, adapt again, continue their inexorable spread. "Did it work?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Temporarily reduce their numbers in those regions, but survivors are already regrouping." And the strikes had an unexpected consequence. The radiation appears to be accelerating certain aspects of the gamma mutation. The infected emerging from the periphery of the blast zones show even greater cognitive function and adaptive capacity. It was almost darkly comic. Every attempt to stop the infection only made it stronger, more resilient, more dangerous. "So, what's the plan now?" I asked. "More bombs? More cities sacrificed?" "No," Dr. Chen said quietly. "We've moved beyond containment strategies. The current focus is on sanctuary protocol." "What's that?" "The consolidation of remaining uninfected populations in heavily fortified secure zones, primarily in Alaska, northern Canada, and selected offshore locations. The goal is no longer to reclaim lost territory, but to establish sustainable human enclaves that can survive long-term." "You're giving up," I said, the realization settling over me like a cold shroud. "Abandoning the mainland. Strategically reallocating our limited resources," she corrected, though the euphemism couldn't disguise the truth. "Humanity needs safe havens from which to rebuild eventually. Site Omega is being converted into a way station for evacuees en route to the Alaska Sanctuary. And the research? The search for a cure or vaccine continues, but with adjusted expectations. We're now focusing on long-term coexistence strategies rather than eradication of the infected. The samples you recovered may help us develop more effective resistance treatments for those who must operate in infected territories." It was the final admission of defeat, not just from Dr. Chen or Site Omega, but from humanity itself. We had created something we couldn't control, couldn't contain, and now couldn't defeat. All that remained was retreat and the hope of eventual adaptation to a changed world. "What happens to me now?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "You'll continue to receive treatments for your condition," Dr. Chen said. "And once you've recovered from your injuries, you'll be offered a choice. Join one of our reconnaissance teams, gathering intelligence on gamma strain activities, or relocate to the Alaska Sanctuary as part of the civilian contingent." "Some choice," I said bitterly. "Risk my life gathering information that ultimately won't matter, or spend the rest of my days in an Arctic bunker watching the world die from a safe distance." Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Horton. You've lost more than most in this catastrophe, but the future of our species now depends on the choices we make with our extremely limited resources. Every person, every bit of knowledge, every day of survival matters now in ways we never imagined before." She was right, as much as I hated to admit it. The world I'd known, the world of oil rigs and foreman and weekend plans, was gone forever. What remained was a desperate struggle for survival, not just of individuals, but of our entire species. "I'll think about it," I said finally, "but first, I need rest. Real rest, not just a few hours between nightmares." Dr. Chen nodded and stood to leave. "Of course. We'll speak again when you're stronger." Left alone, I stared at the ceiling of my hospital room, trying to process everything I'd learned. Nuclear strikes against American cities, the planned abandonment of the mainland, the acceptance that the infected, the gamma strain in particular, represented not just a temporary crisis but a permanent change to the world order. A new dominant species emerging from the ashes of the old. I thought about Martin, alone in his wilderness camp, choosing simple survival over the complex moral compromises of the organized response. I thought about Martinez asking me to tell his family he loved them. I thought about Becca collapsing on the rig, the first victim of Project Chimera that I had witnessed. So many dead, so many turned. And for what? A weapon that had escaped its creator's control, a cure that had become a curse. The answers seemed increasingly irrelevant in a world where basic survival was now humanity's highest aspiration. As I drifted towards sleep, I wondered what the world would look like in a year, in 5 years, in a generation. Would the gamma-infected continue to evolve, to develop more complex social structures, more advanced technologies? Would they eventually rediscover what humanity had built, learn to use it, perhaps even improve upon it? And what of the remaining humans huddled in their Arctic sanctuaries? Would they emerge someday to reclaim the world, or simply fade away, a failed experiment in the grand scheme of evolution? I had no answers, only questions, fears, and the grim determination to survive another day in a world that no longer belonged to us. The ceiling above me faded as darkness claimed my consciousness, bringing with it the temporary peace of dreamless sleep, perhaps the last peace any of us would know in this new world of the infected.